for Chair Fellows, off to a hot start. And he's traveling and we'll get right into it. First thing is the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Counselor Doherty.
Here.
Counselor Donovan.
Here.
Counselor Anderson.
Here.
Counselor Hayes. Here. Vice Chair.
Here.
Thank you.
And Counselor Shoup let me know she would be a little bit late. The first thing up then would be our usual general public comment. I'd remind everybody that it's a 3-minute time limit and try to stay within topics that are under the purview of the town council and follow our rules for decorum as usual. Is there any public comment for items that are not on the agenda?
Good evening. I'm George Majalis. I'm president of the Pine Point Association, and I'm a resident of Pine Point at 57 East Grand Avenue. The Pine Point Association is a nonprofit organization incorporated under the laws of the state of Maine with its primary mission to unify the Pine Point community, to provide timely information that affects our members, and to present in one voice when interacting with other entities. In our first 3 years, we've met effectively with town representatives from public safety, public works, community services, town council, and with the town manager. Tonight, I'd like to offer some ideas for consideration. First, we want to emphasize that Pine Point is both a year-round residential community and a very busy, greatly expanded summer destination. Our needs may differ, therefore, from other parts of town. For instance, in many parts of town, it probably makes sense to repaint the crosswalks before schools open in the fall. At Pine Point, that need and other street repainting comes in May or June when vehicle and pedestrian traffic increases dramatically. Second, as a major destination for short-term and seasonal renters and property owners, the condition of the beach is very important. Depending on weather conditions, one weekly beach removal of seaweed is often insufficient. Additionally, the appearance of the red seaweed or algae that covers most of the hard-packed sand for weeks at a time is a major complaint for both residents and visitors. And our third concern is related to regular street flooding and major puddling from normal rainfall and unseasonal events. A recent project at the corner of King Street and Avenue 5 at Herd Park proved that a rainwater catch basin could significantly decrease the large, deep puddling that occurred after every heavy rain event. Our association's infrastructure subcommittee has documented evidence of other areas of Pine Point where the placement of these catch basins would be very effective. We suggest that the time is now to place these basins in the street while the roads are being opened for water main replacement and before final paving is done at the completion of the project. Our infrastructure subcommittee and other subcommittees are regularly monitoring water main replacement project and the upcoming East Grand Avenue Complete Streets project, and we greatly appreciate the open dialogue we've experienced with town officials, consultants, and current project representatives from Maine Water and Gorham Sand and Gravel. We regularly use this information to inform our membership of over 250 residents and also visitors regarding what's happening at Pine Point, with our periodic newsletters, on our website, and in our Pine Point report in Scarborough Living magazine. Thank you for this opportunity to share our ideas and concerns.
Thank you, George.
Hi. Oh, okay. My name is Pat Degon. I'm on Avenue 2, and I'm on the Board of Directors for the Pine Point Association. And I'd like to address 2 additional concerns that our members have. The first is the concern that we think is actually an opportunity to explore the safety measures along Jones Creek with the work that's being done. The current water line project will have a long trough along the odd number side of the street, and it will be dug up and temporarily finished for this summer season. This is the side where there were painted parking spots, and to date, we are very unsure and haven't been able to get a clear answer on whether there will be marked parking spots for the summer of '26. We believe this will result in a significant negative impact with illegal parking throughout the point. Possibly fisticuffs, as we've seen in the past. We've met with the town manager and the police chief to share our concerns about lack of safe exits from the driveways and from the side streets obscured by the parked cars. There's also significant risk to anyone walking on Jones Creek. With carriages, beach carts, bikes, and even just exercising, there are no sidewalks on either side, and parking cars results in the necessity to actually walk in the travel lane. We understand there are new regulations and when applied will reduce some of the parking spots, but we suggest eliminating all spots and exploring this as a test this summer. We also plan to conduct a survey with our members to collect direct feedback, and we are happy to share that once it's completed. The second issue is also related to safety and the need for crosswalks from Jones Creek Drive and the side streets to the beach access across King Street. Currently, the only crosswalk is at the very beginning of King Street by Snowberry Park. We strongly recommend painted crosswalks on King Street to access the public rights-of-way to the beach. This would be on Avenue 1, 2, 3, 4, and especially Avenue 5, where many cars are parking in the overflow lot and actually have to cross over to get down to the beach. We've been asking for crosswalks for years, and again, with the repaving plan for the future, we believe now is the time to make this happen. Thanks for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Ken.
Hi, good evening on this beautiful, long, lengthening days here. My name is Steven Zamorowski. I live at 19 Teresa Massey Lane. I'm a member of the Land Trust, or the Land Board, as well as the Housing Alliance, but my comments this evening don't represent either of those organizations formally. I'd like to talk about something that Tom will probably mention later, that is the raising of Route 1. If I read the newsletter correctly, the plan is to have a pilot where Route 1 north would be, one lane would be eliminated for a period of time during the summer. To me, that doesn't really make sense, given that we have traffic year-round. We've already talked about Route 1 being a pass-through community. I see traffic heading south in the morning and, north in the morning and south in the evening. So I'm not sure why we're only testing that solution during the summer. I'm actually hoping that's not really a test where we're going to close the lane, but maybe do it electronically or just count the cars. But if we are closing or doing anything, I just urge the council and the town to request that state extends that pilot through the fall so we can really get an idea of what's going on. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Conley. I live at 2 Simplicity Place in Scarborough. Since we were talking about traffic, what I notice is when I come out Commerce Drive, when the light turns green, the walkway also lets the pedestrian cross. So I'm coming out Commerce Drive and I'm taking that left, they're walking. So that needs to be addressed because someone could potentially get killed there. I don't know who, the Department of Transportation or whatever. Also, when you're coming out of Hannaford parking lot onto Route 1, the light turns green, I'm taking a right, the crosswalk, if someone's standing there, their 15-minute thing is going. So it seems to be a big issue in both those areas, and I would hate to see anybody get hurt. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody online? Thanks.
Hi there. Carol Gustafson at 66 Scotto Hill Road. Just I have some brief comments. I was very pleased to see that the proposed order number 26-028 is worded as intending to, quote, keep all options open and available regarding the culvert replacement or the restoration of the brook at the bottom of Scotto Hill Road. I just wanted to bring to the council's attention in a more formal way. I had spoken at the workshop, but none of that was sort of recorded or kind of officially noted, that there are still a number of questions that remain unanswered on this topic, including comparing the brook restoration to the resilient culvert. Which one is going to be better in terms of handling, water, additional water that might be coming through because of the Route 1 changes? I mean, I think we were told at the workshop that the resilient culvert would be very effective with letting water through, but what we haven't heard is it a wash? Is one better than the other, or is it basically equal? Note that the town website on Scotto Hill Road lists both options as, quote, consistent with the vulnerability assessment. So what is unclear to me and perhaps to the council is whether a separate assessment has been done on that specific issue, given that there's a lot of attention, again, on how the Route 1 changes will affect the whole town, including with water flow. Secondly, given that there will be multiple culverts on Payne Road that need to be replaced, I think what's not been clear to me, and again, perhaps to the council, is what would the impact be of adding the resilient culvert to the end of Scotto Hill Road versus letting the brook be restored? So could it work really equally to just have the brook restoration on Scotto Hill Road and then the culverts on Payne Road? I don't know the answer. I think science needs to help us there. There were comments made at the workshop about abutters, about, again, the impact of water becoming brackish and ruining farmland. I think I haven't heard the answers to how would these culverts impact that issue versus how restoring the brook would impact that issue. Separate issue, I'd repeat the plea that was made at the workshop for speed mitigation in any of the budget decisions. The town website on this road states that, quote, other traffic mitigation measures would be explored, but it's part of only if there is restoration of the brook and not a culvert replacement. It seems to me that it would be more important for mitigation measures to be added if the culvert is replaced, since so many drivers, we heard 1,000 a day, maybe they're not all individual drivers, but there are 1,000 trips a day or had been on the road before it was closed. So many people use this as a cut through, apologies, cut through, and at very high speeds. Note as a footnote, there are some new stop signs that have been installed, and they are completely ignored about 80% of the time. Finally, and I know I need to wrap up, the website states that the decision will be largely influenced by public engagement, which seems to say the more voices get more weight. There are only 15 houses on Scotto Hill Road versus 1,000 cars going through every day. I would just emphasize there are cost concerns with just going with a replacement. There are potential environmental concerns. And again, we have very strong concerns about speed. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Any other public comment for non-agenda items? Seeing none, we'll move on. So the next thing that comes up is the minutes from our last meeting from March 4th. We have a motion to
So move.
approve.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes? Show that is unanimous. The next item is adjustments to the agenda. There are none. There's items to be signed or treasurer warrants, and I signed those prior to the meeting. And the next thing is the town manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'll do my best to incorporate some comments into some of what I've heard from the podium, but forgive me if I fail to mention everything. I'll certainly circle back to the folks with some more detail. With respect to Scotto Hill Road, this is a standing item, has been and will continue to be. We appreciate that it's a point of great public interest in a matter for this council to kind of sort through. We do have a matter in front of item in front of council tonight. It's specifically designed to give public kind of line of sight and direct awareness as to what we're doing. there are certainly budget considerations that are a big part of this. And my fear is if we simply leave it at that, it'll get lost in the shuffle of budget. So this really, as the title suggests, is intended to give direction to me and my staff to pursue additional grants to make sure that we're preserving all the options, and to also pursue and request sufficient funding to keep those options all open as well. And I'll speak to it perhaps in better detail when the item comes up as well. With respect to the budget, myself and staff continue to be fully immersed in the process. The council will receive the budget from the superintendent and myself at your next meeting on April 1st. We'll do our best to get that out to you in advance for your review. No surprise, it continues to be challenging to us. There's a number of choices we've made through the years that show themselves in the budget needs. We're also affected by all sorts of other external factors, cost increases and the like, and certainly we'll go into that in much greater detail over the coming weeks and months. Legislative matters continue to kind of occupy our time. This session of the legislature is coming furiously to a close. The items that we're kind of tracking very carefully and are involved in is LD 2173. This is the so-called Fix-It Bill to 1829. There's been a number of work sessions. I know a number of members of council and staff have provided testimony to the standing committee concerning this matter. I believe there's another work session scheduled for tomorrow at 1:15. If you look at their schedule, it suggests to me that their time is running out. So I think they must be getting very close. Very pleased to be working with GPCOG and also some of our municipal partners. In particular, the city of Westbrook is really providing great leadership, and Jenny Franceschi is able to be at most of the work sessions and has been recognized by the committee on a number of occasions, which is a very good sign. They view her as a good trusted source of information. So we're in kind of lockstep with her. She has advised that a number of things that do seem to be coming into focus that we should be pleased with have to do with reducing some of the density requirements in the non-growth areas, and also allowing rate of growth ordinances to stay in place with kind of the same metrics, 105% over a 10-year average. Those were two of the things that we raised, and so those things seem to have gained some traction, but we'll know much more after the work session tomorrow. The other bill that kind of landed in front of us about 2 weeks ago was LD 2226. This regards a proposed change to the education funding formula. Unfortunately, Scarborough and essentially, I think 3 other Cumberland County communities take the vast brunt of the effect. In our case, we would stand to lose next year something in the order of about $1 million. So we did put together some testimony. I know the superintendent did appear at the work session about 10 days ago. Scarborough, unfortunately, was a lone voice in opposition to this bill. As you might expect, there are winners and losers. We're in the minority by a long shot, and that's fairly common territory for us. But we'll continue to track that and be an advocate as this goes forward. I will mention Representative Murphy Noonan. Murphy is conveniently the chair of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee, who's the standing committee hearing this. So I think that's, and I believe she understands our concerns and shares in them. So pleased to have some leadership on the committee of record, understanding and hearing us clearly. The council and perhaps the public's aware, about 2 weeks ago, we did receive a letter from Inland Fisheries and Wildlife providing some recommendations around changes to our animal control ordinance. That letter has been received and distributed. It's fairly softly worded. It is recommendations. So in consultation with council leadership, we think it's important, given the amount of public interest in the matter, to have the full council have a conversation around what is this letter, what does it mean. I've done some preliminary work with legal counsel just for my information, but I also want to share it with you and the public in terms of how all these documents work together. To beach management agreements, the state and federal laws. So there'll be a piece that we're developing for that. The council might recall that we suggested you put April 22nd on your calendar as a date for that. I've been able to change things around, so we'd like to do that on April 15th. It would be a workshop before your normal April 15th meeting. The reason for that is twofold. One, we can avoid school vacation week. We're also aware that some key members of the dogs group aren't available that night on the 22nd, and it just seems appropriate to have changed this. So, and what that will do is I'll be switching that out with a matter that was discussed at the podium this evening, which is a meeting with MDOT regarding this demonstration project for Route 1. So that, I'm probably confusing you now, but on April 22nd, we'll have a standalone workshop on that matter. Just to speak to the commenter a bit, they are intentionally picking the summertime. Obviously, that's the highest peak traffic for us. It doesn't necessarily pick up all the seasonality, particularly the school activity. But the proposal is to run it from June 15th to August 10th. And we had a meeting just this morning. We're trying to be very clear to them that we want to know what a success look like of this demonstration, and really are impressing upon them to make sure that they have good data collection before and after, so we can appreciate what is the effect of this. And to answer the question raised at the podium, they will be essentially mocking up the lane closure. So it'll be a physical lane closure with temporary barricades, if you will. One of the things that we're concerned about, frankly, is the diversion on local roads that will likely have, particularly if some of the signs advising what's ahead are prior to some of those intersections, Payne Road in particular. So, yeah, staff has been really insisting that if, one, let's try it to make sure it works, and two, let's make sure our council and our public, have line of sight and awareness into the proposal and why. It's in a similar vein, under a separate matter through PACS. This is under the Safe Streets for All program. The area of Route 1, essentially in the area of Down East Lane and Little Dolphin Drive, if you can picture, just up from the Hannaford Drive intersection. Over the years, there have been, I think, 2 pedestrian fatalities in that general area. And so that's long time been a high crash location. As you might recall, that's a 5-lane section of road, sidewalk only on one side. So this is intending to, they'll be putting up 3 temporary islands, again, with some sort of temporary barriers. They'll not be actually installing crosswalks, but they're intending to, I guess, get a sense of what that does to traffic patterns, because a sidewalk would need to have certain refuge areas in the middle, given the expanse of the road through that section. So it appears as though that demonstration project will be happening simultaneously with the one route further down Route 1. So it's looking like it's going to be an interesting summer here in Scarborough. Several other points of interest. The town has been involved in a lawsuit for 3 or 4 years now. John may be the only counselor that was on the council at the time. This involves the council denying a marijuana establishment license. And it had to do with some fairly unique and particular circumstances around some changes to our zoning ordinance regarding setback from residential properties. Long story short, we were successful in Superior Court. That was appealed to the law court, Supreme Court. And just last week, we were made aware that that appeal was ruled in our favor. So essentially, they've exhausted everything. I do not expect there'll be any further actions in that matter. Curbside recycling. This is a program the town's done for almost 20 years now. This is the carts in front of your house for trash and recycling. Historically, we've only had one bidder for that bid, and that never feels good. Casella has been the sole bidder, and Scarborough's not alone. Everyone else in the curbside business is kind of at the mercy of this single vendor. I shouldn't say that and suggest that we've been taken advantage of, but it's always good to have competition. I believe in that. And we're pleased we were back out to bid. There was a new bidder that came into the conversation. We've had a series of due diligence meetings with this new bidder. This is Garbage to Garden. You may recall the name and perhaps see their trucks on the road. They started in the business, as the name suggests, doing household waste, kind of compost, on a subscriber basis. They now have the city of Boston, the city of Medford, Mass. So they've expanded and demonstrated that they're able to scale. We still have some questions, but I'm intrigued, and we appreciate how important this municipal service is to our residents, and just the consistency and timeliness and all of those sorts of things are really important. So we're doing our due diligence, and just again pleased to have another bid to look at. Quickly on road projects, seasonal road postings are underway. The frost was particularly deep this year. It's finally coming out of the ground, it seems, but we still have some areas that are in really rough shape. Time will tell if that settles back down, or there's areas that need repair. So we'll pay very close attention to that. As was mentioned, in the Pine Point area of town, the water main replacement project is fully involved. We have allowed the contractor, Gorman Sand and Gravel, to use our temporary overflow lot as kind of a laydown yard. It is a mud pit at this point. We're not surprised by that. They've assured us, and we've done this in the past, they'll restore it back to the original condition. As was mentioned, there was a request from their infrastructure subcommittee some months back regarding drainage in kind of the cross streets between Jones Creek and King Street. Almost every one of those has kind of a natural low point, kind of a saddle in the middle. And as you might expect, that area is kind of dead flat and water needs to run downhill. So each of those roads, or most of them, have what they call a dry basin. So it doesn't have a pipe that actually discharges. It will collect at the low spot and dissipate in the ground. But that's only effective with kind of fairly low rainfall. Any significant rainfall, those systems just aren't capable of. So those conditions persist. We absolutely agree that now's the time, with the road torn up, if we're going to do something, is to do it now. We've engaged our consulting engineers, and we should be getting some evaluation and report back from them in the next couple of weeks. I'll be in touch with, I think Richard Silkman is leading that effort on your behalf. Lastly, a Spurwink Phase 2 project. Shaw Brothers will be mobilizing on that project next week. And they've assured us, and we've seen this in the past, once they show up, they really push to get the job done. So we're hopeful that they're going to stay committed, put the resources, staff, and equipment to really getting that project done and behind us. Eastern Trail project, way ahead of schedule. That's the good news. The challenge is, and this is a $1.6 million stretch of project. And so not surprisingly, there are some prizes along the way. Really the conditions, I think the engineers thought that we could kind of just remove the vegetation and kind of create a trail. They found that there were some areas that were incredibly wet and really just unstable. So there's been some cost overruns with that project. We had a meeting today with all of our consulting partners and with DOT, and we'll be asking for additional funding from the state. I have also been working with Norm, and I expect in the coming weeks or months, we may come to you. There were some other funds that have been bonded that are no longer needed for a road project that could be redirected this way. So it's a matter I will likely bring through finance and ultimately to you for your attention. And lastly, the Scarborough Community Chamber will be hosting an elected officials dinner. Historically, they characterize this as kind of the appreciation dinner. As I understand the format, and I think Councilor Kane might know more about this than I do, they really want to use it as an opportunity to kind of talk about some topical items. And so my request to you, it's short notice, but this is March 22nd. So next week, 5:30 at Scarborough Terrace. I'm looking to get a head count from folks that are willing and able to attend that session. So you don't need to commit now, but I'll try to catch you after the meeting. Certainly I've missed something, but
That was pretty thorough.
I know the speakers, and I assure you I'll circle back to you directly.
just on that elected officials dinner, there are also people coming from the school board and school administration. They are hoping to have enough elected officials where they can set up a couple of kind of subject matter tables and just have very casual, open discussions about topics related to what can be done to improve things to improve for the business community in Scarborough. And they have ideas as well to go back and forth. So they're hoping to at least be able to have a couple of us at each of those tables. And then that's obviously that there's a dinner as well and all with it. So good way to attract people. All right. Thank you, Tom. Moving on to the standing and special committee reports.
Do we have questions for Tom?
We can, sure.
Please, shoot.
Yeah, there was a lot to take in, because it was, I think, the longest one he's ever done. But the one that is, I need a little more clarity on is the Route 1. They want to close it from June to August, or not close one lane, I mean.
Yeah,
And this is just a test to see, what is that for the construction if they do it? They're not proposing having it one lane gone from across there at any time. I know there was
Yes.
discussion of saying you could make more pedestrian room if you closed one lane northbound or southbound. I think that's ludicrous. You can't do that. There's no way. You're gonna have traffic if you move for one way all the way to Saco, or you're gonna be all the way through here at Oak Hill if you close down one of those lanes. And that is the problem with their test. I would think 1 to 2 weeks of suffering like that would show them what's going to happen. And I might be wrong. Maybe it will come out that, it's no problem. People go down Payne Road, but look at Payne Road. So I can't imagine that it's going to turn out well. And my biggest concern is them doing it for 2 or 3 months when you really could know what's going to happen. I would think within a day, but give it a week or 2 weeks. And I know it's a state and they're going to do what they want to do, but we should really be pretty adamant about this is, if we have traffic backed up all the way through Oak Hill in a week, are they going to then open it up? I mean, you can't have the fire station blocked off because traffic stopped.
Yeah, clearly, if there was a catastrophic failure, they would remove that.
Right,
I'm
right.
certain of it. So
Yeah.
let me back up and forgive me. So this is a project that DOT conceived of. This is to really deal with the persistent flooding of Route 1, which will frankly only get worse, and the sinking of Route 1, frankly.
Right.
So when they were considering this, and their proposal is to essentially raise the road section about 5 feet across the marsh proper, and put in kind of new a bridge structure rather than a series of culverts to allow actually more water to pass under Route 1. As was mentioned, that is going to affect areas on the north side of Route 1 up toward Payne Road. So as they consider that, we raised the question about pedestrian and bicycle availability. And so in response to that, they're proposing a multi-use path. But they cannot, they want to maintain the same width. They have to from an environmental point of view. So obviously, if you dedicate what now is a travel lane to something else, something has to give. Their proposal is to limit Route 1 north across the marsh to 1 lane. And they seem convinced internally that based on volumes and design, that is going to be fine. We were equally concerned that is maybe not fine, and let's know more about that before we actually commit and do it. And it's irreversible. So their proposal was to do this so-called demonstration project.
Right.
I am certain if it's a catastrophic failure, they will make swift efforts. And I see the police chief in the front row. I think he'll be persuasive in saying that this cannot continue. So I encourage, that's why we're having a workshop with council, so you can hear from them and you can provide your feedback. Staff is I think done what it could to get it to this point, but it's now time for the public to be aware and to provide comment.
Okay.
Okay.
That
And
clarifies.
I should also mention, they'll be at the Transportation Committee next week on the 24th. If anyone's interested, that will be kind of the same material, but we're really trying to put them through
normal process and get full exposure to this. John?
So to Scott's point, like if we have this workshop, is it really just informative, or could we say we don't want to do it? We would rather just keep it 2-lane roads, and that's.
I think
where
you
we
could.
would-
I think you could. I mean, we have any number of plans and studies. Transportation Committee has certainly been an advocate of pedestrian opportunities. And so our view is if we don't get it now, it will never happen, frankly. And so I'm pleased we forced the issue, but I think that is the ultimate relief. If you choose not to do that, we can go back to kind of business as usual, frankly. And they probably, well, I won't speak on their behalf, but they're doing it to accommodate our request in design. One more point on the culvert, just common sense, is the culvert that's there now in Route 1. I don't notice a big buildup on the ocean side of Route 1, like that culvert is restricting the marsh. I think it's enough flow. It seems to be. It doesn't seem like a lot lower on one side than the other when the tide is coming up there. So even if you do a bigger opening, I don't think it's really going to necessarily let all that much more flow that it will really affect Payne Road. We could hope, but. The one thing I'll say is that in high water conditions, when water, is forced over the road or through the culvert to the north side, and that holding area between Route 1 and Payne Road, Route 1 will be open and Payne Road will be closed for 4 or 5 or 6 hours longer because the water is restricted and held back on the other side. So there's no question those culverts are a restriction. On the Payne Road, you mean? Well, I think they're a restriction either way. You just have more real estate on the downside you don't notice it as much, I suppose. But I think it's a restriction both ways. Yeah.
All set, move into committee reports. Counselor Hayes?
Just one update. I have a rules and policy committee being scheduled for April 6th. First one.
Okay.
Transportation, as Tom mentioned, meets next week on the 24th. Not only will the DOT work be there for the Route 1 plan, but also Metro will be there to share their final recommendations for the routes for the bus service that we'll be piloting. SEDCO meets tomorrow. Communication also meets tomorrow. We wrapped up our conversations with counselors. So if anybody in the audience participated, thank you guys for coming and sharing your feedback with the council. We'll continue to do that and plan to do something next more around budget. So we'll be talking about budget roundtables and how this conversation for council piece fits into that. The only other thing that I have an ask out to the council is we are going to pilot something called communications ambassadors, where we're just looking to kind of gather residents that are very diverse, not only in location, but demographics, opinions, where we can bring them together. We're looking to have like 12 or 18 people come together and really just have an initial conversation where we want to hear what they're hearing. We also want to share with them information about what's happening at the council level, really seeing if this is something we may want to do more formally, if we want to establish a group that helps us, one, be just like another focus group almost for what's happening in the community, but also people who we know are connected, who can get that information out. This is also thinking about the loss of the leader and how we don't have that. So seeing if there's like a word of mouth thing we want to do with residents that helps to get the word out. So if you have recommendations of individuals, just let me know so that we can try and plan something. And again, this is just an informal pilot that we want to try.
Yeah, just to add on to that, part of the idea came out of the conversation meetings we had, because when we were talking to people in North Scarborough, they had a different perspective and felt like, they weren't always represented, and then people in the beach community. So there's just so many different regions in town. And then we had a number of people too that had been, say, moved to Scarborough in the last 3 years. So their perspective was very different than someone who had been here, 4 generations. And we started talking about it and really said might be value in bringing together a diverse group that represents all of that, to say, given that, how do we communicate? What do we communicate? How often do we communicate? And just how does that sort of play into the strategy of trying to be more transparent and better communicators in town?
Counselor Donovan?
The appointments committee did not meet. The sustainability committee meeting is coming right up. Thanks.
Okay.
Harbor Committee, we met, there wasn't too much, it's kind of slow still. They were talking about, the finger piers. They've got new ones of them coming, gonna put them in. I would like to know what's happening with the old ones, because I think they're still like brand new. It'd be a really good deal for somebody, but, and other than that, there wasn't too much talked about other than that. Thank you.
Thanks. For me, the Finance Committee did not meet this month in recognizing the amount of work that town staff needed to put in towards being ready for the budget presentation. The school department has presented their budget to the board, and that'll eventually be coming over to us. There's a joint presentation for both those budgets to the council on April 1st. Chamber of Commerce is making great progress on the summer concert series. That's really lined up well, and pretty sure at this point it's a full slate of performers. And Tom's already mentioned that elected officials dinner that came up in the chamber meeting to try to push us along with that obligation. Community Services met for the second time this year, and they're really working on creating a framework for a whole volunteer program through Community Services where Scarborough volunteers could work at a variety of those different programming that they do. And they're putting together a very formal framework for that includes training and certification, recruitment. Also, that is just getting underway. I also worked with Nick Cleash, who's the Director of Community Services, and the Parks and Conservation Land Board. Right now, Parks and Conservation Land Board is kind of the town group that forwards proposals to use the land bond money for conservation projects. The primary presenter for that has been the Scarborough Land Trust, but there's been some others. There's been recognition that those funds are also available to buy land that would be for recreational use. And so I really give them credit for, right now they have an analysis tool to decide and recommend to us the viability of a project that comes for a property purchase that comes forward. And so along with Community Services, they're going to create a parallel analysis tool that if a property was available for use more for recreation, that it met certain criteria and would then they'd have kind of I guess, unbiased opinion on that property opportunity. I really like the idea because I can envision where there could be a property that both had conservation value and recreation value. And so you'd want to be able, if it had to be one or the other, you'd want a fair way to make that decision of what's the better use of the town bond money for the value of the town. So that's also just getting going. And then on a kind of just happy note or good news, I want to say congrats to Gail Plates. She's the Active Adults Coordinator for Community Services, and just recently has won the Distinguished Performance Award from the State of Maine Recreation and Park Association. So it's a statewide award. And according to Nick, he believes it's the first time that a non-director has won that award. So it was impressive. So congratulations to Gail. That's everything I've got. All right, I will go quick with some. The next thing up is resolutions and proclamations. There are none at this time. The public hearings, none at this time. No old business at this time. And we'll get to new business. First one is Order 26-025, the first reading and schedule a public hearing for the new proposed Chapter 1020, the Town of Scarborough Short-Term Rental Ordinance, presented by Autumn Spear, our Planning Director.
Good evening. Let me share my screen real quick. I have a brief presentation that I will share with you all. So this particular item, short-term rentals, we've been talking about for some time. Last October, it came before you all at first reading and it did fail to advance. It was a registration only. Right. It was a registration only process. So it came back before ordinance committee in February and then back to March. And so what you have before you is a proposal that looks very similar to our registration proposal from last fall, but it also now encompasses a zoning proponent. So this particular agenda item is only for the first reading for the registration part. We will bring back the chapter 405 requirements depending on what happens tonight, and I'll go into that a little bit further. But the first part, the chapter 405 zoning ordinance, that is where we're proposing to add 2 new uses, the non-owner occupied short-term rental and the owner occupied short-term rental. Some of the concerns that I heard from the ordinance committee in January and from council was that there was a real significant concern about investment groups and different entities from out of state and away purchasing properties and really in neighborhoods where that might not be appropriate. There was also some new concerns based on these new legislative changes that will be coming down that would allow much greater density in our neighborhoods. And so that is really why the second part of this has been added this go round for consideration. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So the new uses, again, these are the specific definitions. So the short-term rental that's owner occupied, it is essentially a short-term rental for that owner's primary residence. I do have it in here that the owners don't necessarily have to be on premise. So we're not doing that hosted, non-hosted version. It's just that the owners can show that this is their primary residence. And then, of course, the non-owner occupied is just as it would seem, it is not occupied by its owner. It is not their primary residence. And so those definitions would be added. And then these tables are new. Some of you have seen these in ordinance committee. I've got another project that's going through ordinance committee that I've been holding on to see where this project goes. But this creates an opportunity to look at all of our zoning districts together in one consolidated table. And so the highlighted districts, the highlighted uses rather, short-term rental owner occupied and short-term rental non-owner occupied, this table shows you where those would be permitted. So as proposed, I have a special exception requirement in our residential districts, the same as a home occupation. And then the Ps mean permitted by right. And then the condition 60, that is a specific condition that would exempt the beach overlay zone area. So we have, in the beach overlay zone area, we have rural farming zoning, we have R2 zoning, R3. So this was a way to really address both situations, I think. So the performance standards are very simple. There's 3, so that's part of the zoning district changes. So it would be no more than 1 short-term rental should be permitted per single family lot outside of that coastal beach zone. And there shouldn't be any signage or any other exterior indications outside of the coastal beach zone. And then the traffic, excuse me, shall not increase the volume of traffic to create a traffic hazard. So I included this. I won't go through all of these. It's in your packet. These are the special exception criteria that have to be met for the Board of Appeals. So the way it's drafted, if I own a property in R2, R3, or R4, and I'd like to do a short-term rental, I would apply first for a special exception through the Board of Appeals. And I would have to show that I meet these criteria. And then if they grant that, then I would go through and I would register with the town. So these criteria really have to do with maintaining the viability of the neighborhood. Your neighbors do get noticed. And so this is the Board of Appeals. They meet once a month. They typically see our variance request. We have different variance requests, 3 different levels, and they also see these special exceptions. So that's the process that's written in now. So I mentioned this coastal beach zone. we've gone through a couple of different iterations. In February, I showed the ordinance committee what it might look like at a quarter mile and a mile. And this is what has come out of that. This is roughly a half a mile from the coastline. The red dots are known short-term rentals from Airbnb and VRBO from last April. So I reached out to GPCOG. They have some software and they can get some data, and they can also help us with this if we pursue it in the future. So we were able to overlay the data that was known at the time. There were about 155. Now, they did not pull the properties that would not be on Airbnb. So I think we've heard that there are several. So this is not all encompassing. I think we probably have closer to 300, 350. That was the number that I got from a more exhaustive search when we first started looking at that. And that would have included all of the properties. But there's some zoom ins of this map. So essentially, the purpose of this is to acknowledge our traditional beach areas where short-term rentals is really part of the community. And so all of Pine Point would be in. There are a couple of red dots you can see at Black Point Road, or Pine Point Road rather, that would not be included in the coastal beach zone. And then this shows Proudsnack, Scarborough Beach State Park area, and then Higgins. And then what the compromise at Ordinance Committee was to look at either side of Spurwink Road as that boundary. So as part of this next meeting on April 1st, depending on how this goes, we would come back with also an official zoning map change. So we have to adopt an overlay zone and Chapter 405 changes to put this into place. So this is overall just a little zoomed in look. Part 2 of this is, like I mentioned, the registration ordinance. It is 95% the same as what you saw last time. There are a couple of changes. The fire made a couple of changes to the fire protection notes just to be more in line with state requirements. And then I took out the 90-minute contact information for just, we had heard from it so many times, it just seemed really reasonable, especially since it was for our own purposes. And then we added some transitional provisions. Now that we have specific rules outlined for uses, we also have to acknowledge the current situation and then how that might take place in the future. So I'll spend just a bit of time with the transitional provisions. So if you remember, in all of our residential districts, a special exception was required. So what's in your current draft is that if you are currently, and you can prove up for 2025, that you have been operating a short-term rental, we would have a opportunity for that special exception to be waived. And really it helps staff, myself and my group, not having to process a multitude of special exceptions at one time. And so we've got that written in. And then we also have a provision to amortize existing that would no longer be permitted. So in some of the districts, you cannot do non-owner occupied, so it's not an allowed use. But if you are doing that now, we have written in an opportunity to amortize that out through the end of 2027. And of course, that is all subject to change. These are just some ideas to really put in front of you all. So as I mentioned, it's 2 parts, and I realize it's a bit confusing because Chapter 1020 doesn't have to go to the planning board. It is strictly in your purview. And then anything that has to do with the zoning ordinance or zoning maps has to go to planning board for public hearing as well. So I've separated it a bit, and then we'll bring it all back to you on April 1st for the zoning for first reading and the zoning map. And then that would go on to planning board and then come back to you all and join it all back together as proposed on May 6th for a town council public hearing. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Public comment first for this? No. Sorry,
Just questions from council.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll
I guess just try and clarify, put it in layman's terms to figure all this out, is if somebody wants to go on vacation, they want to Airbnb their house out, then they don't have to get, do they have to get inspections and all that kind of stuff before they can do it? They have to come and get a permit?
Yes, so the question is about if, I'm assuming it's your own home and you want to do a short-term rental. And so the short-term rental is anything less than 28 days. So if you intend to do that, you would have to, currently as written, get a special exception. So you would really have to plan for it and then do your registration process through town clerk and go through that minimal safety inspection.
Yeah,
So
because
yes,
I've had people talk to me. There's people, quite a few, I guess, that they go on vacation. And so they Airbnb their house out for just the 2 weeks out of the year when they're gone, and it helps them do their vacation. And I just think it would be an extra burden to have them have to go through this whole process of this. I get it that it's a problem with out-of-state entities buying a lot of the houses in the area and then Airbnb them out. And that's really, I think, what we're after. We're not after residents. And you did say so basically everybody has to register, even if you have an accessory unit and it's your home, your, primary residence, you live in Maine, you've been here all your life, you still have to do the whole registry thing.
correct. Yes, every property, even in that coastal beach zone, would still be required to register. That would be universal process. Yeah.
I don't like it, but.
Autumn, to kind of follow up on Scott's comment and your response about everybody having to register, is the thought process that it's a business and like any business that you would have to go through like we did the food trucks, for example, and you had to, register that. So is that an alignment with everything else as far as business process?
I can speak to the history of it. It started out that we wanted to gain more information about who was actually short-term renting, and there were some concerns about complaints and safety issues, and then it has grown into, yes, it is a business, people are making money off of this, should we have some information about that? And from a public safety perception, what are we sending our people into unknown? So.
Anybody else? I'm sorry, I'm not letting you go yet.
Oh.
Um,
I won't go
First,
first.
first of all, thanks, because I know it's been a long process and you're trying to take care of a number of different concerns and issues. And while it feels very complex, but I understand that's partly because of what you're trying to juggle. Some of these I can just do it separately, but I wanted to point out a couple of things in the definitions. It says that if the owner of the property is an entity rather than individual people, one of the people in the entity have to declare the primary residence to be considered owner occupied. Just some quick disclosure. My family owns a cottage out at Higgins, my extended family. We don't short-term rental it, but it is in an LLC. And I think a lot of properties, those family kind of properties, are structured that way. And so nobody would live there full-time. Nobody could declare it as a primary residence. In our case, it's not even winterized, so we physically couldn't live there as a primary residence. So that was something that maybe some wording change on that would allow, I don't know how you define a family LLC versus a corporate LLC, but it might be something to consider. You touched on this, the beach zone at approximately half a mile. I'm assuming that's just because you're going to define it by roads rather than distance. Okay. And originally there was a cap involved. Do you know what the motivation, maybe, John, I know you made an amendment for this, kind of what the thinking of either having one or not having one?
The idea of a cap was discussed a bit, and it was, I brought it up in the first February ordinance committee that we could consider a cap for non-owner occupied or for all outside of the beach zone. And at that ordinance committee meeting, there was really more of a concern about non-owner occupied. So the suggestion was to put that cap on. And then at the last ordinance committee meeting, I think there was really, for maybe lack of a better word, there wasn't a true understanding of what we were capping quite yet. Maybe we didn't know everything that we have. And I think that's why it's hard to put some of these rules in places. We don't quite know exactly what we have. We know what's happening at the beach, I'd say, but elsewhere we're a little bit more limited. And maybe Counselor Anderson can elaborate on that as it was his cap. Discussion or? I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Wait till.
I would say wait till discussion and I can.
Discussion.
Okay, that's fine. And then and I'm sure I've just missed this, but can you just tell me a little bit about if the owner occupied is permitted in the residential areas, what's the necessity of having the special exception process if it's already permitted in that area?
As written, it's not permitted unless it has the special exception. Right. But what's the purpose of the special exception? It's really to allow that extra step so that the neighbors, I think, have an opportunity to weigh in. And then we have an opportunity, the board and staff will give them information about the impacts that that might have on that neighborhood.
Okay,
This is a fact. I want to clarify that in a residential zone, if you want to run a business, you have to go through the special exception process. So that was the reasoning behind that. It was consistent with how we handle someone doing anything non-residential in their home.
Okay,
This,
great.
the
Thank you.
same as the home occupation, right?
Okay, I'm all set. Thanks. I guess we'd go to public comment now on this subject.
Denise Hamilton, 2 Rod Road. First, Autumn, if you can just clarify something based on Scott's question about someone who is going to go on vacation for 2 weeks and wants to Airbnb. Isn't the state's short-term rental, if it's for less than 15 days a year, it's not considered a short-term rental? So you might want to just check into that, because if it's, I think, is what I read. So anyway, now I'll continue. First, regarding the owner-occupied short-term rentals, the ordinance requires the dwelling to be the owner's primary residence, meaning where they live most of the year. To make this requirement enforceable, applicants should provide documentation verifying residency, such as a driver's license, voter registration, and an affidavit certifying the property as their primary residence. Keeping this documentation on file would also help the town address future noncompliance. While doing some additional research, I came across something. Just curious, it's not as big a crowd as ordinance, but how many people here have a short-term rental? And how many of you are registered with the State of Maine Department of Revenue holding a retailer certificate?
Yeah. Denise, sorry to interrupt you.
Yep.
You really need to
Yeah, thank you.
address your comments to the.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the reason I ask is because in Maine, short-term rental property owners renting for fewer than 28 consecutive days are generally required to register for a retailer certificate with the state, even if they advertise only through platforms such as Airbnb or VRBO. While the platform, or in some cases the owner, collects the 9% lodging tax, the property owner remains responsible for ensuring the tax is properly remitted and that a registration number is on file. This requirement also applies when a rental agency is used. To strengthen accountability, Scarborough should require submission of a state retailer's registration certificate as part of its registration process. Consistent with existing requirements for cannabis operators, retailer certificates are not searchable, unlike cannabis licenses. This requirement is both reasonable and necessary. I would also encourage the council to reconsider the length of the transitional period. which effectively allows 2 full-time rental seasons before compliance is required and is not necessary. Additionally, I do not believe the special exception requirement should be waived for properties claiming prior short-term rental use at the time of the effective date of the STR ordinance. The special exception process ensures transparency and provides notice to abutters when a business activity may be operating in their neighborhood. Many zoning districts in Scarborough, even small home occupations, must obtain special exception approval. So exempting short-term rentals would apply a lower standard to this type of business. Allowing an exemption based only on an affidavit stating the property was rented for as little as 14 days and 25 doesn't provide sufficient accountability. And finally, I strongly urge the council to reinstate a cap on non-owner occupied short-term rentals outside the coastal beach community where allowed. At present, the town does not have a clear understanding of how many such units exist. And without a cap, there's no mechanism to prevent further expansion that could reduce Scarborough's already limited housing supply. As a reasonable compromise, once the cap is reached, applicants could seek approval through the special exception process, allowing the ZBA to evaluate whether additional short-term rentals would contribute to overconcentration in a given area. Ultimately, the goal of this ordinance should be clarity.
Can you please wrap
Yep,
up?
I am. 2 sentences. Ultimately, the goal of this ordinance should be clarity, fairness, and accountability, ensuring that short-term rentals are properly regulated while protecting neighborhoods and preserving Scarborough's limited housing supply. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Good evening. My name is Danielle Delaquilla, and I want to thank John and Autumn for all the messaging back and forth today, as well as the phone calls. So thank you. Basically, Autumn sort of addressed my questions and concerns, but my husband, Tim, and I live at 104 Fog Road, which is, just outside that beach zone. And we've been doing short-term rentals since we moved in nearly 5 years ago. It's really just during the summer months, and we would go live in our camper van because it helped us pay our mortgage and our taxes. We signed on to a mortgage when my husband turned 60, so a 30-year mortgage looking ahead at 60 seems a little rough, especially given it was in 2021 and you know what that was like. So I guess my 2 things. One is, sadly, 3 years ago, we had a fire in our backyard, and we have been working to rebuild a building in which it could help us continue to pay our mortgage without us having to go live in a camper van. So we've been working with Brian Longstaff and for the past year with Autumn to make sure we're doing everything in regulation. We're not doing an ADU. It's going to be additional living space. But my husband's been working on all of it, and sadly, it hasn't gone as fast as we wanted to because he's had to do all the work while maintaining a full-time job. So what we're just wanting to be sure is that the plan has been for us to rent our house out in various weeks during the summer, whenever it worked for our schedule, whenever it was booked, and we would stay back there or vice versa. With the current language, it would limit us to only using one. And we would never be renting it out to 2 different parties at the same time. We're building this building so we don't have to leave our property. So Autumn looked into possibly changing the language a little bit. And if you don't mind, Autumn, is that something I could read? Is that okay? Okay. So anyway, no more than 1 short-term rental shall be permitted per single-family residential lot, excluding short-term rentals in the coastal beach zone as it reads now. In addition, if the owner of a single-family residential lot outside of the coastal beach zone has multiple structures or room offerings for short-term rental purposes, each option must be independently registered, and only 1 short-term rental activity may occur on the premise at a time. If that was in there, we would be covered. I'm kindly asking you to consider that language. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eli Edgecombe, and I am either the 5th or 6th generation of my family to be at Higgins. And what that means, practically speaking, is that we moved into a little farm town and a cottage, and it became an expensive neighborhood around us. And I want you to just remember that a lot of the people who live in those communities are taxed to death and have to rent in order to be able to maintain their family home. And I'm one of those people. That's why it's pretty high stakes for me and people like me. But the nature of the way this has happened, the process, oftentimes we don't get notification to be at these meetings, that these meetings are happening until it's too late to ask for time off work. And we keep having this situation where we think something's resolved, like it was voted down, and it comes back again. And it comes back again as a surprise with like a week's warning, and that's too soon to get off work to be able to be here. And one of the things that I've noticed is over the last 2 years, I've been in crowded room after crowded room after crowded room where the majority of people in the room are displeased with the idea of this. But it's different people each time because of that, the way the process has worked. And so I think there's a lot more people than you may be aware of that do not want this to happen. And the part of this process that has most eroded trust for me, and I said this to the ordinance committee, but I want the town council to hear it, is that no one in this process has been able to give me a satisfactory answer as to where this came from and why we're doing it. And why it keeps coming back, even though most of the people who are in the meetings representing the town do not want it. It really feels like the tail wagging the dog. And there have been other instances of that in the town of Scarborough. And when it happens, it erodes trust in the basics of democracy. And so I just want to let you know how frustrating it is as a citizen that when this is voted down, it doesn't go away. It comes back, it gets changed. I have to take another shift off work that I can't afford to take off to be able to be here to defend, again, my right to do the basic thing I have to do in order to maintain my family home. The nature of my neighborhood, which is Higgins, is that we have this. It's a basic part of the culture of our area. And no one who has been part of that community, at least, has been at these meetings saying that there's a concrete reason for it. I have heard for the first time at the last meeting, I heard about affordability and private equity as an issue. I think we can address that without all of the rest of this. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Scott Townsend, 2 Acorn Lane, real estate agent, short-term rental property owner, business owner involved in short-term rentals. And I know many of you have heard me speak before. I had a bunch of notes that I'm probably not going to get to because, to be honest with you, again, it's become intertwined and overcomplicated. I got an email around noon today from Autumn saying that there's this part and this part. I'm not sure if you're voting tonight on anything because I'm still not clear on that, but I would vote no. If you're going to do this, do it right. I've said from the beginning, I think a simple registration process is fine. I think knowing who's responsible for the property, a cell phone number for that person, an email for that person. So whether it's police, fire, code, whoever it may be, can reach them. I have no problem with that. I think it's fine. And I think the town needs to understand how many short-term rentals there are. There's ways to find out, but again, like Autumn said, you don't know. So to try to put a cap on something. So now everything's intertwined. There's some meetings about this, but then this part goes in front of planning board. Vote no, start with a simple registration, and then deal with the zoning stuff that you have to deal with, because I understand that's something that has to be dealt with. I don't understand why it's bundled. This has been going on for over 2.5 years, and frankly, people are getting worn down and frustrated. And Eli talks about like losing faith and trust, like seeing that come up last minute, it's not right. So a couple things to consider as you move forward with these conversations. I would caution you highly about this owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. I personally own a property out of this area that would be considered a non-owner occupied unit because it's not my primary residence. It's here in Scarborough, but I actually spend more time there than I do rent it out. So the other thing to think about is short-term rentals have existed since the beginning of time when there were dwellings. You see movies where weary travelers passing through, someone rents a room for the night. It's happened. It's a residential use that happens, and it's been happening since the beginning of time. More importantly, as a real estate agent, I stand here, I want to caution you about infringing upon property owner rights. And maybe get acquainted with the 14th Amendment. Recently, some courts have struck down rules because what you're doing is you're establishing unequal treatment of property owners by having owner-occupied versus owner-occupied. I think by going that route, the town is going to open itself up to a litany of lawsuits. Currently, right now, Clark County, Nevada, South Lake Tahoe, New Orleans, Dallas, New York City, Biloxi, and most recently, West Hartford, where the court recently ruled in favor of property owners. And it's just creating more and more problems. Again, go with a simple registration process. Also consider, you're talking about going in front of the ZBA. Our police, our fire, our code office, they're already burdened with the jobs that they currently have. Our ZBA, why burden them even more with a problem that doesn't even exist? There's a few homeowners that aren't happy having rentals near them. But you know what? I'm not happy with the neighbor that smokes a cigarette in their yard and I can smell it, but that's their right. I'm not happy with the owner that keeps a bunch of junk in their yard. Vehicles, campers, trailers, whatever it may be, looks like crap, but you know what? That's their right. I'm not happy with the one house in the neighborhood that looks like crap. They don't mulch, they don't mow their lawn, but you know what? That's their right. The people that want to rent their house out, that's their right too. Don't take that away from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Wayne Johnson. I live at 14 Maple Ave here in Scarborough. Something to say about short-term rentals. It is my understanding that short-term rentals, specifically non-owner occupied short-term rentals, are currently prohibited in R2 residential zones away from the beaches. With that being the case, it appears to me that the town, by overlooking its own written ordinances, has put themselves in the unenviable position to correct a situation that should never have occurred in the first place. When I chose to purchase a home in Scarborough a little over 10 years ago, with plans to live out my retirement in this community, it was with the expectation that I was doing so in a quiet neighborhood setting conducive to everyday residential suburban activities. Had I known that there was a possibility that the overall character of the neighborhood could be altered by the introduction of short-term rentals and all that came with them, my decision to invest in this community would have been unlikely. That being said, I'm here now, and I ask you to approve the recommended time limits being proposed for currently non-conforming, non-owner occupied short-term rentals. In my opinion, giving non-conforming short-term rentals until the end of 2027 to divest themselves of their property seems both fair and more than adequate in light of the fact that they should never have been allowed in the first place. Any extension beyond 2027 would feel like the town is disregarding the rights of those of us who call Scarborough home. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, let me just hold you up 1 second. We have some, I'm just going to go online for a minute.
Amy, you should be able to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Amy Chamberlain. I currently own 2 properties here in Scarborough. One is my full-time residence on Ryfield Drive in town. My second property is a resident I started out with as a full-time property with my children. And I use that property as a summer rental. I am absolutely okay with a registration. No problem with that. I'm happy to conform with that. What I'm not happy about is seeing here how we went from simple registration, which the town seemed okay with, those of us who've been speaking up for quite a while, to absolutely looking at that, and I can't even understand it. I really need to sit down and look at it. It's very comprehensive. I think it's overdone. I think the town really needs to think clearly about many things regarding this, but my major concern is the distrust in this process. I really thought we had this taken care of with doing a registration. Now we're looking at all these different zonings and the mapping that was showed earlier for the red dots that are within that half mile. Am I to understand that they lose their ability to have a short-term rental with a home that they own here in town and pay taxes on? Is that correct if this were to go through?
No. But we're not
Okay.
really, we can't really debate the subject right now, but the
I'm
quick
not
answer
looking to
is no.
debate. That's just one of my questions. So my apologies, but it's just really disheartening. I really don't want to lose the ability of having my rental down at the beach. I know there's where we say we're going to allow that to still continue because that's what it's been like. But I feel very strongly we should not be taking away the rights of those who do pay taxes in town. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You want to do the next one? Yeah.
Ellen, you should be able to speak.
Hi, thank you. Ellen Jennison. I've been the Director of Rental Operations with HigginsBeachMaine.com, servicing owners and guests at Higgins Beach for the last 15 plus years. And in the last couple of meetings, I've heard mentioned a couple of times private equity and affordable housing. And I would just like to mention a couple of things. I've worked for the past several years with the Vacation Rental Professionals of Maine organization, with a lobbyist examining bills as they affect the vacation rental community. And I would challenge anyone suggesting that a short-term rental is taking away from the affordable housing and creating a shortage. I would challenge them to take a look at the definition as set by the state of Maine for short-term rentals, as well as affordable housing. And I can guarantee in 99% of the cases that a short-term rental does not equate to the affordable housing. And the two are not working hand in hand. And a short-term rental is in no case in Scarborough shortening or creating a shortage of affordable housing. And with private equity investors coming in and creating short-term rental opportunities in neighborhoods, I would be interested when and if the registration process does come into effect. I would be interested in seeing the data gleaned from that as to how many private equity organizations are actually creating short-term rentals in our neighborhoods. I'd like to thank the council and Autumn for your tireless work on this. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ellen.
Hi,
Sorry,
Steve
keep you waiting.
Demorowski, 19 Teresa Massey Lane. I want to thank the council and the staff and all the folks that give us great services in town. And thank you very much for not only voting down the registration, but also bringing this issue back up. I did not support registration because I did not think it went far enough. Because I believe, and I think the data shows that short-term rentals do pose a quality of life and a risk, safety risk in our neighborhoods. It also, data will show, I believe, that it does raise the price of all housing and it takes housing out of the stock. Maybe the technical definition of affordable housing, whether that be 60% or 120% of median income, maybe that's true. But the problem here is people can't afford to buy an average home in this town or any town in Maine, and this is true all over the country. Partly because, not only because, but partly because properties are being bought to run a business, a short-term rental business. And that's the problem we're focused here. Safety, quality of life, and availability of, let's call it attainable housing, maybe not affordable housing. So I support this. I also support a cap. I think we should cap this. If we have to be fair and do a lottery for the number of licenses like we do with kayak rentals, kayak spots at the beaches, that's fine. I think we should do that. I'm also worried about people gaming the definition of owner occupied. A couple has 2 homes in town. Each of the couples list one as their residence, but they live in one and rent the other. I think we have to be careful of that. You game the system quite a lot of ways. The biggest problem we're dealing with here, I believe, is the non-owner occupied residential outside the beach zones. That's where the problem is, because people do not want to live in a neighborhood with a hospitality business running in their community. But I also believe that people who are landowners, property owners, pay tax should be able to make some income on that, on their property. So my suggestion would be to cap the allowable days rental to something like 35 or 40, 5, 6, 7 weeks. Gives the owner occupied folks, they can go on their vacation, they can rent their house, but they're not running a business all year round in that community. Finally, affordable housing, short-term rentals, housing in general is a crisis in this community. It's a crisis in the state of Maine. I think it's time for Scarborough to look at hiring a full-time housing administrator, somebody that can help us with this, because I think we need to be aggressive on monitoring and maintaining these licenses in these businesses that are running just like a hotel or a motel. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Donna Galuzzo. I own 2 properties in Scarborough. One of them is a short-term rental. First of all, I want to say thanks for the opportunity to say a few words, and I definitely support the idea of a registration system for short-term rentals. Understand the need for that with reasonable fees, and I think it's a great idea. I do have some other concerns to bring to light. One is I'm very wary of a cap on short-term rentals, and my biggest question is, respectfully ask, what data or research has been done to support the specified cap number that's been proposed? I think that's something very important to consider. Are we operating with real data? There's been a lot of discussion suggesting that short-term rentals may contribute to nuisance properties. Again, I'm very respectfully asking, where's the data to support this claim? And if nuisance properties are a concern, and I would understand that if they were, then perhaps there are more direct ways to address that, such as strengthening and enforcing noise, parking, occupancy ordinances. There are other things that can be done, I think, without broadly restricting property owners' rights. There does seem to be a perception, I've heard a lot, that out-of-state or international buyers are purchasing homes primarily to convert them into short-term rentals. Again, my respectful question to the council is, where's the empirical evidence that supports this claim? I think, again, it's very important to act with grounded data and not just act upon the ideas or conceptions of others. I also want to highlight who renters actually are. They're not just vacationers. I've been doing this for many years. They're people with strong ties to the community. These are a vast majority of my renters. They're former residents returning home. They're families visiting loved ones. They're professionals that choose to work temporarily in this area. They're remote workers. They're even sometimes individuals who are seeking medical care in Scarborough. And these renters serve a broad and more meaningful purpose than is often portrayed in these conversations. For many homeowners, short-term rental income is not a luxury, it's a necessity, and some rely on it to afford to stay in their homes. I think it's important for us to remember that. Restrictions could unintentionally force people out rather than creating long-term community stability. I want to say that again. Restrictions could unintentionally force people out of this community rather than support long-term community stability. So I want to urge the council to adopt an ordinance that includes registration and reasonable oversight. But I strongly believe the best path forward is to gather empirical data over the next several years through registration and reporting so that future decisions can be based on a clear understanding of how short-term rentals are actually affecting the town of Scarborough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Suzanne Conley. I live at 2 Simplicity Place. We have a place in Scarborough Downs also. So I appreciate the council. I know that we're all here when we have rentals, we're trying to work together. Autumn, I wouldn't want your job, but thank you very much. Seems like you're doing a good job. So I understand that, you know, all the cities, well, most of the cities are regulating Airbnbs and I have no problem registering. I would hate to see a cap on it. I think that, you know, most people that own properties are responsible. We've been doing this for a year, no problems whatsoever. I prefer a long-term. I do a lot of traveling nurses that work at Maine Medical Center, Mercy, Southern Maine. These are real respectable people, have not had any problems. I think also with doing this, I talked to the city of South Portland and I did ask them, do you guys have a cap? Do you guys, no, they don't. I'm sure, you know, you guys will check with some of the other cities and try to get some information on, you know, how they do it. It only helps to make our city, to be up to standards also. So I hope there's no cap on it. I hate to see people get shut out. I think that all Airbnbs should be inspected. I would want mine inspected. I'd want to have my fire extinguisher up to date. I'd want to make sure that my smoke alarms are working. I would also like to make sure that if I have any gas, that I have a carbon monoxide detector in there. I would hate to see anybody get, you know, and then some people have, mine is just one floor, but some people do basements. You know, you want to make sure that you have egress windows in there. So I think that's all. You know, I just want to say I really oppose to a cap. I hate to see people get shut out. You know, and I think that you also have to look at, you know, rules. If someone's disruptive, you know, one strike, maybe two, you're out, you know? So I think we're all trying to work together here to you know, to make it fair for everybody. Not just, and I'm happy for the people at the beaches. I think they're like kind of grandfathered in. But I hate to see other people get shut out. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. You got one more online? Okay.
Allison, you can speak.
Hi, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Allison. I own Bailey Vacation Rentals with my mother, and I'm also a Scarborough resident. What stands out to me in this discussion is that we are still considering a fairly complex and restrictive ordinance without first having a clear understanding of our actual scope or impact that the short-term rentals are having on our Scarborough community. I also think that it's important to recognize that previously similar ordinances did not pass, and the proposal in front of you today is even more restrictive. It raises a real concern about moving further in the same direction without first addressing some of the gaps that existed the first time. We have heard concerns, and those are, of course, extremely important, but we still don't have reliable data showing that short-term rentals are creating a widespread or consistent issue across the Scarborough. Without the foundation, it becomes difficult to ensure that regulation we're putting in place are effective. What I see every day are homeowners and managers alike who are doing their best to maintain their properties, contribute to the local economy, and remain part of the community. That's why I believe the most reasonable path forward is simple. Before expanding regulation, we should first understand what we're trying to regulate. A straightforward registration system would give the town the ability to gather accurate data like how many rentals exist, where they are, and whether there are patterns of concern that should be addressed. I also want to emphasize that many of us in this space are extremely committed to being responsible operators. We care about the neighborhood we work in because we are part of the community as well. I fully support reasonable oversight, but I would encourage the town to keep the approach simple. Start with registration and ensure that any future steps are guided by facts and a clear understanding of the issue. Thank you again for the time you put into the process. I know it's been a lot for everyone, and I do really appreciate all the time being spent.
Thank you, Allison. You have one more, Liam?
Andy, you should be able to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Andy Blanchard, 112 Maple Ave. I don't own a short-term rental or live near any that I know of, though I previously did at a previous residence. I just think that the topic should be looked at with more information to better understand the situation. Maybe other people have heard from others, but it kind of sounds like like, listening to the other public comment the past couple months, sounds like there's like a couple nuisance properties that people are talking about. Kind of seems like a registry and a couple years of tracking the data could, would make sense rather than trying to push through another ordinance without like the data to back up the decisions. Talking earlier, they said Metro's piloting things, the communications committee is piloting things, the DOT is experimenting on Route 1. Why are we pushing through an ordinance without the necessary pilot or information? Additionally, perhaps I'm wrong here, but my understanding of 1829 and 2173 is that it's only increasing density via ADUs. And I believe Scarborough has a regulation prohibiting short-term rentals in ADUs. So in theory, 1829 and an increase in density wouldn't affect the number of short-term rentals in town. Is that correct?
We can't really go, that one is a really dense subject. We can't go through it in this forum.
No, I know, but I just wanted to point it out that I'm pretty sure that theory is false.
Just go ahead, please, if you're gonna.
Oh no, that was the end. That was the end of my.
Okay.
That was the end of my thought. Sorry about that.
Great, thank you.
Averill Hill, Maple Avenue. My comments tonight are regarding non-owner occupied short-term rentals in historic residential neighborhoods miles away from our beaches. Under our current ordinance, owner-occupied bed and breakfasts are explicitly banned in residential districts like Oak Hill, and they are subject to safety inspections as well as performance standards. Yet the town gave the green light to non-owner occupied houses converted into short-term rentals in these same neighborhoods in 2017 via a murky policy. These de facto hotels aren't subject to any safety inspections or standards. What? I learned that this policy was made behind closed doors without any public notice, hearings, or council input as required by law. Based upon these facts, the policy is invalid. But even if the policy had gone through the proper channels, a town policy is not a zoning amendment, nor is it a promise of permanence. For these reasons, I support short-term rental safety inspections and a transitional period for non-owner occupied short-term rentals in prohibited zones. I want to emphasize that the transition period in the draft isn't about denying a business owner their property rights. We don't live in an unorganized township in northern Maine where anything goes. It's about recognizing that a property owner's business model does not have the right to override the residential character, safety, and peaceful enjoyment of the rest of the neighborhood. Investors should have no business removing starter homes out of our housing inventory in traditional neighborhoods to make them into commercial enterprises. Upholding residential zoning isn't punitive, it's protective of the private property rights of others. Much like unfiltered cannabis businesses, the byproducts of non-owner occupied short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods cross boundary lines onto abutting properties, but these are not odors. This is true even for the most conscientious owners because it's not about their character, but about neighborhood character. They can't filter out increased traffic, parking nuisances, noise, a revolving door of vacationing strangers, and safety concerns. It's the price residents pay while short-term rental investors profit. To say otherwise doesn't pass the sniff test. For that reason, the transition period should not exceed the end of 2027 to protect the rights of residential abutters, especially in dense neighborhoods with working families, children, and retirees. As written, the town is being very generous with these short-term rental investors. They will have time for 2 more seasons of short-term rental income and/or time to resell their investments in a market that has no shortage of willing buyers. They can also choose to do rentals longer than 29 days or move into these houses. 2 suggestions for autumn, if I may. If a short-term rental owner states their property is their primary residence, they should be required to provide a driver's license or state ID and voter registration to the town clerk for verification. And finally, the definition of seasonal residence is written as too narrow and should be amended to read simply non-primary residence. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Good evening. Sean Flaherty, Black Point Road. There was something in this ordinance committee memo or coming out of the ordinance committee that was missing in today's, that was there before. On March 5th, the ordinance committee memo says, under background, the vast majority of comments were in opposition. February the 11th, ordinance committee memo, the vast majority of comments were in opposition. Town council memo on October 15th. Again, the memo, public comment. The vast majority of comments are in opposition to the proposal. October 8th, the memo provided, public comment. The vast majority of public comments are in opposition. September 10th, public comment. The vast majority of comments are in opposition. July 9th, 2025, the vast majority of comments are in opposition. It's not in this memo for some reason. I think that's important. I think it's important because people are losing faith that they're being listened to, and it's clear. I want to just, kind of highlight a few things that were said at one of those specific meetings, specifically September 25. My understanding really was that a lot of the pushback we were getting was from enforcement and penalties, which were eliminated, Councilor Shoup. I think what you need to do is not make it onerous on property owners. An ordinance that calls for safety provisions that are tempered by comments we've received. It's about education. Councilor Donovan. For me, it's about gathering data and having that available. I think about how many people are saying here, how much parking do you have? We can gather that data and reevaluate those situations. Councilor Shoup. Not talking about inspections, but for me, this is an occupancy and a parking issue, Councilor Shoup. It's not part of the data we are trying to collect, at least for me. We have a 3-bedroom home, but they're listing occupancy of 25. I think that's what neighbors are concerned about. That doesn't happen here, and it's already not allowed. Regardless of what issues are, when you're talking about a town ordinance or laws and regulations in general, it's generally a good thing that it's not easy to change ordinances. It should be a very deliberate process, Councilor Fellows. So this should not be an onerous process. It should not be over-regulation, Councilor Donovan. The public comments that were made in the period in 2025, there were 28 people. There were 2, maybe 3, because someone wrote 2, in support. And instead of getting scaled back, compromised legislation, we're called in again today without the data, which we were supposed to be collecting, and making new zoning complex, convoluted, difficult to understand, and restricting property rights of people who are doing what is a legal residential use. I know I'm out of time, so one final thing. I will say this. The ordinance and inspection requirements are not just onerous for our private homes, especially when it's our private residence. There are legal issues with constitutional implications. Just ask Bar Harbor and figure out why they amended their short-term rental ordinance again just last November to remove the inspection process, because it's a privacy issue guaranteed by the 4th Amendment. That's just one of the few issues here. So I hope this goes back to the ordinance committee when we can compromise, where you will listen to public input, take the words that you said, and be deliberate and pass something that's going to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, April Scyther, 14 Huntley Drive. It's really weird being on this side of the podium. So first, I'm going to start with my disclosure statement, which is something that I had to do when I was part of the council, but I think is still relevant to making public comment before you and with our residents here, is that my husband writes the municipal software that GPCOG uses to register short-term rentals. So there's a little tidbit there. I did not ask him whether it was good for his bottom line for me to come and take the podium tonight. He knows better than to try and stop me anyway. I'm going to go off script, and that's sometimes works and sometimes it's not so great. You guys have a lot of stakeholders in the room. You have some diametrically opposed views in the room. There are some people in this room that have spoken tonight that I truly adore, that I fundamentally disagree with a number of things that they position themselves on this evening, and that makes this really hard. I think that from the general public's perspective, it is incumbent that we trust the council to apply the rules fairly and evenly to everyone at all times. This feels to me like decisions are being made where people's personal property rights, which we all hold very dear and we all have a different definition of what that means, are being subject to a different set of rules depending on where you live in town. And I think that that becomes very, very difficult for people to understand both the rationale behind that, but then also what that means for them and what that's going to mean for them in the future, which creates a lot of fear. I have no intention of renting my house, but I could potentially need to. I don't live in a coastal community. And so the idea that I would have to go before the Zoning Board of Appeals to get a special exemption seems really unfair, if I'm being candid. I don't understand why a different set of rules would apply to my house. I don't have neighbors that would care. And so if the process of asking for an exemption is purely administrative, if I'm subject to the same registration rules and inspections, then that makes perfect sense to me. But if the process of applying for an exemption is subjective, and it allows for a public process, and it allows for scrutiny of my application by the public specifically, I think that that is really a line too far for me. And so I do not support that proposal. I absolutely would support a registration process. I think that that is the place where this all should have started. And so I know that you have a difficult job in front of you and many more opportunities for public comment. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening, Allison Bristol, 6 Bayview Avenue, and I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but it's been really interesting listening to the ordinance meeting and then listening to everybody's comments tonight. And why I spoke at the ordinance meeting was about the proposed cap, which I'm against, but probably against it for a different reason, in that if the coastal beach areas are exempt and there's a 50 cap or whatever number cap in the rest of town, it feels like what we're afraid of are people who are not Scarborough people buying up property and turning them to an Airbnb, and people who don't really care what happens in the neighborhood. And so if we have a cap, then those people would only be looking in the coastal communities because they know that, it's a long shot, if it's a cap, that they're going to be able to rent their home. So the only place in town they'd be able to do that would be at the beach, in the beach communities. And the other thing that I've kind of observed in all this non-resident, resident, not short, it's the language is all very confusing and complicated. But I've been interested to hear folks in town that, particularly the two ladies that have the condos in Scarborough Downs, that they're not like outsiders buying. They're people who live here who have an investment property, so they have an investment in having it all go well. And I know at the beach, Larry brought up a very good point about an LLC that is pretty much a rental property. So, but that's, you've got a longtime family that has that property. Or there are a lot of people at Higgins Beach that have multiple properties, and to have one of them called a non-resident and the other two be, the other two properties they might have or be called non-resident properties and their primary, it just doesn't feel right. So I just, again, based on conversation I've heard tonight, I think start with a registration process and see how that goes. And we do have good neighbor ordinances, and there are all other ordinances in place that if there's a disruptive property, you know, certainly it can be addressed. Enforcement is always a challenge in town, and not because the police aren't doing a good job. There's just not enough of them to go around. That's a plug. And, you know, don't make it more arduous than it needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you. One more.
I know you're not Scott, but Scott, you can speak.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, happens a lot. My name is Meg McDonald. I live at 13 Black Point. I am the CFO for the Scott and Sunny Townsend team, so data is kind of my bread and butter. And I mean, you've heard it over and over and over again tonight. We don't have the data, so we don't know if there's actually an issue. When this first came up, we asked for the data. I asked for the data. And none was given, and none has been given to date. So we don't know if there's a ton of complaints on one house by one person, or is it multiple complaints to multiple houses? Like, we just don't know. And the overlay just seems very arbitrary to just include some of the beach areas, but there's, you know, it's not even an accurate, you know, representation of the short-term residents or rentals in, like, at Higgins Beach. Like, you have a couple of red boxes there. That's not really representative of what's actually going on. But that's because we don't know. There's no data. And just to note, I did pull the information because I am a licensed realtor. You know, we pulled the information for the past 3 years. 75% of the people who are buying homes in Scarborough already live in Maine. So this isn't out-of-state buyers coming in and swooping in and buying all these investment properties. These are people who already live in the state. And then also, I mean, people were talking about short-term rentals, operating it as a business. Yes, money may change hands. Money may change hands on long-term rentals as well, but it doesn't matter. Regardless of the money being changed, there is no change in the physical use. It's still living, sleeping, and occupying the home. So, I mean, I know that there's a point of view about operating a business, but still it's being used as a residential. We do in real estate see buyers walk away from homes knowing that they're going to buy a house and then in like 5 years they're going to make it their primary home. In the meantime, they want to rent it. Well, it turns out that now there's HOA rules, you know, limiting rentals. And so now they walk away. So this can deter, you know, people from coming into the town and buying properties. It can drive down property values. It makes the town less desirable, and it cuts down tourism. So I don't understand how it got this far down the road again after multiple times. And, you know, I thought it was very impactful watching and every single past meeting saying most were against it, most were against it. And yet we're here again. It just seems like there's something else that's driving this, and it's not the citizens of the town. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this subject? Liam, you're good, right? All right, thanks. We'll close public comment. And I believe I'm looking for a motion to move this forward.
So moved.
Second.
Councilor discussion? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so it seems like tonight what we're voting on is just the registration process. So I just want to be clear that that is what the vote is. And it seems like we're not going to vote on a lot of the feedback and concerns that people have about the zoning until our April 1st meeting. But I think we should talk about the feedback we heard, if that's okay, because I know usually we try and stick to the question. So I will say I am supportive of a registration process. I think that is the right first step that we need to take as a community to make sure that we understand the issue. I do think back when this was happening back last summer, it was, you know, and while the process started, was before LD 1829 came forward. And I think for me, that was new information. that we're still kind of learning a little bit about of like what the implications are going to be of that bill on our community, which is why I felt like it was important that we do look at the zoning as we go forward to make sure that when we have higher density where a property today could have up to 4 units on their lot, that we want to make sure that the intent of that law was really to allow for, you know, people to live here, not necessarily for people to start renting out properties in a short-term way. And so to me, that was a new factor that wasn't part of the 2.5-year conversation that to me really shapes the conversation we need to have looking forward. Unfortunately, that law is still not set. As Tom mentioned in his town manager report, things are changing. So the timing of this with that is still, to me, a little bit of a challenge where, you know, maybe things coming out of that are going to be better than what they were coming into this process. And so I think the timing we have on this and as it goes forward, I think works well because we'll have much more information, it sounds like, after the working session tomorrow to know like what's really going to happen with that bill, which to me will have implications on how I feel about this particular zoning as well. So I think I like the timing that we're working through. I really appreciate all the voices that came tonight because I do think we have a spectrum of perspective, and I don't think anybody is wrong in their point of view. I think they're all valid points of view. I think the people who are concerned about safety, quality, and attainable housing, I think that's a legitimate concern. I think property rights is also a very legitimate concern. So this is definitely a challenging thing to find the balance. So I think the registration process is good. I don't support caps because I think the zoning that we're implementing, especially for the non-owner occupied, if you look at it, it's quite restrictive in terms of where we allow it. It's mostly in places that aren't residential as we think of it. And so to me, there's no need to cap in those locations because they really are less of the character. I think a lot of the residents who are concerned about, you know, the suburban or typical cul-de-sac neighborhood or, you know, something like Maple Ave, it's just a different type of zoning. And so I feel like where we put non-owner occupied makes me feel comfortable that we don't need to cap it, at least not initially, let the registration process happen and then kind of go from there. As it relates to owner occupied, I tend to agree that I personally would be comfortable not having a special exception for owner occupied, even in our residential areas. But again, I feel like at least with, you know, the public and even on the council, I think it's a compromise to make it a special exception. I personally don't really like that concept. And I agree with one of the speakers who, you know, we should try and make sure that we're being as fair as possible. And that does feel like it is introducing a lack of fairness in the process. Even though I can really appreciate that, you know, there are still some residents who, whether it's owner occupied, non-owner occupied, would be uncomfortable with the notion of a neighbor renting something out. But then when you think of the cases that Scott raised earlier of something simple like, oh, I just want to rent it out for 2 weeks of the year when I'm away, I don't want to prohibit that. That doesn't make sense. And so again, I don't want to make decisions on this policy out of fear of what could happen, worst case scenario. I think we should be looking at what's really happening, which I think we heard from a lot of residents tonight that, you know, that I want to believe that that's more the rule where, you know, you have people coming in who are traveling nurses, people seeking medical care, or somebody who just wants to visit their family. Like I like to be optimistic. Maybe I'm naive that that's generally what we're seeing. And so allowing for that to continue and perpetuate, I think is a positive thing for our community. And so that's where I'm still not quite there on the special exception for non-owner occupied in the residential districts.
Yes, Karen?
Sure. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. And again, because I know you've been coming to the ordinance meetings, you've been coming to all of that. I'm going to first address kind of to pick up where John left off, because I know we want this process to be fair. And so for me, right now, we have anyone who lives in a residential neighborhood, if they want to do anything outside of live in that residence, they have to go before the zoning board. So if you want to run a little business in your yard and in your house, if you want to do anything, you have to go before the zoning board. So for me, to keep it fair, if you want to do something in a residential zone, you need to go before the zoning board and go through the checks and balances. And that includes safety and things like that. And so I think you know, for me, I moved to Scarborough and I moved to a single family residential zone, and that is my expectation. So tonight I think to me, I'm representing the thousands of people who also moved to Scarborough, who moved to a single family residential zone, who are expecting to live in a single family residential zone. Simple as that. I think you immediately, if you open the door of now you can have 2 properties on 1 property, that immediately changes the whole character of the neighborhood. That is just how I feel. And part of my job, I think, as a counselor is to protect the integrity of the zones and the residential areas. I know we're just talking about the registry tonight, but I think it's important to kind of address some of the issues. Obviously, I support the registry inspections. I think, again, for me, every other business or anything that's operating in the town of Scarborough, if they have someone who's coming into their property and they're paying to stay there, they have to have an inspection, they have to have a manager on site. And so to me, this is the same practice of someone is paying to stay at a property within our town. And so we want to know where those properties are, make sure that they're safe. And for me, also protect the integrity of all the residential zones that we've had. You know, I think we do get stories of people who are having bad experiences, but I don't think it's as rampant as maybe it will be. But I think it could be. I think there's a couple bad apples, but there might be more. I think, you know, the reality is a lot of the places in Maine are doing this. And so I appreciate that, you know, we have some fears about being sued or things like that. But I think this is a common thing for towns to do to try to maintain safety and make sure that the people visiting their towns are safe. So I'm going to support the registration. I do support the caps because, again, I want to protect the integrity of the zones that we have here. And so I don't want to dive too deep into all of the issues here. But, you know, I'm going to continue to support this. We've worked really hard. I think the only other thing that I will say that I bring to the council, one of the things that did come up to us was just, I am now questioning how the state of Maine and the IRS define short-term rentals, because if they're asking us, if they're saying you have to fill out a retail certificate to register with the state, and then Airbnb collects a local tax, I'm wondering if that's how you get that local tax back. So I actually have some more questions, I think, about the taxing does the IRS define a short-term rental as a business? Are they taxing it like a business? Because I do feel like that's something that we should be considering of how those things are considered. I will leave it at that, and we will continue to dive into this. Thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Scott.
I'll go. Again, my big thing is government red tape, and this is the perfect example of it. It's so confusing. A lot of people can't understand it. Nothing against Autumn. Autumn is doing her job. This isn't her thing that she thought of and brought forward. She's doing what she's directed to do. So I just want to make that clear. And it's nothing obviously personal about her. It's just you have people coming here now, and this is what happens. And I've said this before about the committees. There's special interest groups, and it's a small part of the town. And it's easy for somebody to go to a committee when they want something done, and the residents in town don't pay attention. They're too busy with their lives, and it's too boring to watch the meeting, and they don't want to do it. And then all of a sudden, the committee does all their debating, and then they bring it for the first reading, and then word gets around town. And by second reading, you've got a whole house full of people saying, what the heck are you doing? So again, we just have to keep it really basic and really simple. And I'm not even for registration. The only reason I am is I've had one person that has called me, and she was very convincing as far as not knowing who is next door to her, coming into that house with her kids next door. And I can sympathize with that. That could be a problem because you don't know who. 99% of the time it's going to be wonderful people, but that's life. Sometimes you're going to have those bad actors. And again, we have ordinances in town to take care of that if somebody is a bad actor. But it's a little risky if you get a bad actor that does something really bad and you didn't stop it. So You know, and the other issue is, I think that there is, again, we don't know from the data, but I think that a problem with our low-income housing is houses that are in that bracket for young people starting out. We're assuming that it's getting bought up from people out of state. I really would like to know what the numbers are somehow. I don't know how you can figure that out. Maybe it's only 2 or 3 houses in town, and if it is, that's really not an issue. But, you know, and then ADUs, my thing is, why are we having out-of-state firms and then big investors having these big block apartment units? Okay, and we're okay, go. But an ADU, no, you can't rent. You can't rent that out and you can't do it. And the whole idea is to get more housing. Do we want it to go to Airbnb and it is a commercial thing? Probably not. But I think the halfway between thing may be that, you know, definitely 2 weeks, you shouldn't, I don't think you should have to register anything. If you want to go on vacation for 2 weeks, you don't have to do anything. And they alluded to the state already had that law. So there's something there. And maybe you want to boost that up to a month. You know, people can rent their house out even for a month or 2 months. Let them have that. But if it's going to be a year-round thing, where it's just another state firm, just got that as investment property, they're just going to Airbnb it 24/7, you know, all year long, then that could be an issue, you know? And I think we should support our residents who live here in town, have lived here all their lives, over 10 years, and they own a home. I think they should be able to do it without all the red tape. I think we really have to draw this back and make it a very simple. Again, the more red tape you have, the more taxes you're going to pay, because you're going to have employees to manage all of this. If you're going to have all of this inspection and checks and balances, you're going to have, you know, we keep bringing these things up with the fee thing, you know, now there's fees. You have a whole line of people coming in here, and another month or so, this place is going to be booming with people coming in to pay their fees. And the fees that they pay basically pays for the employees to collect it. So it's like, we're not gaining anything. It ain't like it's helping with the tax base, because you're just spending money that's coming in. Unless you start increasing the fees substantially, and that's a bad thing, because now everybody ain't gonna like that. So, yeah, I'm really torn, even on this first step, whether or not I will be for it, because of the red tape. I'm leaning towards maybe just allow, a lot of people said registration would be okay, but I don't know, we'll have to see how that works out. But I guess we could try it, maybe do it as a temporary basis, say, hey, we're gonna have registration for a year and see what happens and then revisit it. Maybe, I don't know. But that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Bill?
Thank you. I appreciate an audience that comes out, spends all this time, and I appreciate advocacy. As a lawyer, I think it's a way to get to good results. And I think we saw a lot of that tonight. I certainly found myself better informed coming out of this than I did coming into it. And so I thank you for your efforts on that. I agree with a lot of what John and Karen said, so I'm not going to repeat it. I've got doubts about the present proposal beyond the registration process. I think we do need to have standards that protect renters because it is a business, and Karen made that point. But I don't think, as my fellow counselor at the end of the table, we don't need a ton of red tape. And so I would be in favor of proceeding tonight with a registration process approval vote. And I think the 6 today of us here need to do some thinking about how far we want this to go. Because I think there's some serious limits that should be imposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
Right. Thanks, Bill. That was great. I also support a registration process, and I think that we need to get a sense of what's our baseline on this. Do we have like 500, STRs in town? Do we have 50? I mean, we have no idea. So I think it's important to figure out where we're starting from. I agree with Bill. For me, the registration too is a safety issue. I actually rent a lot of Airbnbs. We have a child that lives in Los Angeles, and we go out there and it's, very strict. But I also want to know, going into rental place, that it's safe, that there's a fire escape, that there's, a smoke detector, that there's a carbon monoxide. So I think, I rent them expecting to be in a safe environment. So I think that's critical. I spent, I don't know how many hours yesterday and today just literally studying every town around us, looking at what cities do. I know in California, there are many cities that just have a complete ban on STRs now because of outside investors and because of the lack of housing inventory and driving prices up. So that's one side of it. I also agree with a number of folks who said, property rights. So at this point, I totally support a registration. I support, I think I do support a cap, but not 50. It might be a much larger number, but I think it's a lot easier to have a reasonable cap, which could be 500, I don't know. Because it's easier to move a number up than to put something out there and then have to backpedal and pull it back. So I think I would be in favor of having a reasonable cap and then monitoring that for a year, see what that looks like, and reassess and reevaluate.
Thank you. I'm torn on this as well. John, you make a great point about the cap as far as that for non-owner occupied, that it's restrictive enough by the zoning eventually when that catches up, that in itself, that will be a cap. So I was originally against a cap because I think the number is arbitrary right now. I don't think we really know what's good or bad with that. So that kind of gave me some comfort that there would be some control in that. So thanks for that. And Scott makes a great point about the short-term rental. The mini term that is not so much a business as just an opportunity. And so there's maybe some work there that defined by number of days or something that would be interesting to me. I started in this way back with that I've been in favor of the registration and inspection all along. First of all, that is the way we would get the data that all of us are looking for. And it just made sense from a safety standpoint. But so originally that's where I wanted to stick. And then I did really appreciate the ideas and comments around that this short-term rental is a business operation in a residential community. And that is something I agree with the property rights wholeheartedly, but you also have the rights of the abutting properties, not obviously they don't go hand in hand, but the consideration of the abutting properties. So I would support this moving forward, but I still think there's a fair amount of work to do. And I think we should have, because of the complexity of it, I think we should have every expectation that we're not finished. Particularly as once that registration process gets in and we do start to gather data, there should be a very clear acceptance that we could have to revisit some of this based on the data. But I do think that the original thing painted with much too broad of a brush, and the effort to recognize and appreciate the culture of the shore communities was a really good long effort to make that distinction compared to the residential parts of town. So I appreciate all the work that went in to try to define that in a fair way. But so I'm not saying to table it, but I'm saying I think we've got more work to do to get to a final resolution.
The questions come up a couple of times around sales tax, and I made a couple of calls today just trying to, because I know when we go to California rent, there's a California sales tax, which is outrageous. And then there's also an LA County sales tax, which is by county out there, they can do that or not do it. And so I thought, well, that might be a good way to generate revenue to offset some of the surprise expenses that have been coming our way. And what I was told, and Tom may know if this is correct or not, is that the 9% sales tax is for the state of Maine and that individual towns cannot impose their own additional sales tax.
No, the Maine Constitution does not allow us to impose any sales or anything other than property tax.
Sure, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I would just add, as we figure out exactly what we're gonna do, because I agree, like we're not done, the work is not done come first reading for the next time. Today, the only thing we're restricting is allowing short-term rentals and ADUs. That is the only thing that we're currently in town doing. So I think we should just think about what is the right step, which could just be, again, as simple as saying the zoning, saying where it's allowed, trying to be not super restrictive, that kind of reflects the behaviors that we think are happening today. And then through collecting data, see if we need to go restrictive or not, because we may not need to, we may not have a problem. So I would just urge the council, like I know we could go one of two ways. Either we go very specific and restrictive and change it later and be less restrictive, or we could be a little bit more open to start and then get more restrictive as we have more data. So my preference is the latter, to come into this saying, okay, we're already today really have no restrictions except for ADUs. So let's just be thoughtful for our residents and for the people who have been operating the way they've been operating. What is the right first step in the direction? Because I do think personally zoning has to be a part of this. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it has to be super complicated, super restrictive, but we can start that zoning process and being more clear, particularly for the non-owner occupied. Like that was always for me the bigger issue. If it were up to me, it would be just being very clear where non-owner occupied is allowed and keeping that more restrictive than anything else, and allowing owner occupied, more flexibility there. And so, but again, that's just my personal opinion, and we have residents and counselors who have different opinions. So I'm sure we'll find the right compromise as we work through the process.
Sure, Ken.
I'll just say, we're not creating the wheel here. I think maybe we can dive back to 3 years ago and maybe readdress at some point how the other communities jump-started this, how they got started. Were they restrictive? Were they very open? Did they do a registry and then create an ordinance? That might be helpful as a little bit of guidance, because again, I feel like we're operating a silo right now where it's like this has been done. There's been probably good stories, bad stories. I think that might at least influence or help us make the next step.
So would you see this pushing back the ordinance?
No.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess a question, I don't have the answer to this. When I talk about caps, I guess what I'm trying to do is be preventative on something that could become a big issue down the road. And I don't know, but I don't know if this has happened in Maine, but in the country, if I look at like Vegas or Austin, there's bigger cities where there's no issue, and then all of a sudden developers kind of sneak in and all of a sudden they own like 500 properties. And when if that started to occur, is there a roadblock we can put up? I mean, we can't just like change the process in the middle of it happening. So if we can, that's good. So I don't know the answer to that, but when I think about trying to prevent a down the road issue, it's not our citizens and somebody who lives here and also has a condo at the Downs and that type of thing. It's literally an out of state, group kind of sneaking in, and all of a sudden, they have 100 properties.
Hold on, Scott, you had some.
Yeah, I've made a decision because of the constituents that have called me. I'm not really for this, but I will vote for this first step for them. But I'm not going to promise anything further because I'm pretty sure I'm going to be opposed to it, and they may not be happy with me. But I do appreciate them calling and they did convince me to come over to the other side a little bit. So I guess I will vote for this. And I really want to strongly emphasize, I think this is all we should do. I think we should just end it here. And again, see what we have. And it will get brought back up. It always does. That's what happens with politics and government, is it gets voted down and they just keep bringing it back and bringing it back until finally it gets hammered through, maybe, or not, you know. But yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. Go ahead, Jim.
I would just add, I agree with Michelle in terms of taking thinking about a preventative measure. And that's for me where LD 1829 and what happens to me is gonna be.
Yeah.
Whether I'm gonna support or cap or not, if that continues the way it's written without significant changes to either density or rate of growth, I do think, you know, that is where I would think a cap discussion maybe needs to come into play. So that's where, again, I still don't fully support it, but I can appreciate that if we're trying to be preventative in nature, like that is a huge thing that we need to deliberate and discuss of like, what are the implications that law will have? And to me, that's really gonna dictate, you know, the extent of what a good cap could look like.
Yeah, I think the intent with 1829, as far as I know, it doesn't speak to short-term rentals at all. But the intent in that with the increased density is to increase the housing stock for both ownership and rental. So I would think that any push to allow that higher density to become short-term housing, I think would have a very strong footing to resist that and deny it, because that would be against the intent of that law.
I just want to be clear from a process point of view. I think Autumn laid it out nicely at the beginning. I want to kind of remind us all that this comes forward through ordinance is kind of a two-part proposal. First part being the short-term rental ordinance, which essentially is the registration process. That can stand alone. And as she mentioned earlier, there's reasons that we've kind of delayed the other piece. But we have full intention, unless you advise otherwise, to bring that zoning piece to you on the timeline that we've discussed. You can choose to do with it what you will at that point. So I just want to be clear, that's we're staying the course.
Yeah. Or maybe Tom, you can answer this. So some of the objection is the complexity of it, and particularly the special exception process to go through zoning board of appeals, which I'm having a hard time seeing for the zoning board where they're gonna say no unless somebody says, oh no, I'm not gonna meet that criteria. Is there ability to have that go through the clerk's office as some other things are approved at the town clerk level rather than the zoning level? I mean, so to just take that out of it, it would be part of the application process and it would be the clerk's office that would approve it.
Certainly, I think that process was proposed in response to concerns expressed by committee members and members of the public in terms of a process that we have in place that gives public notice and gives an opportunity for awareness and comment and so on and so forth. So that's not to say another process couldn't be used. That's what came forward as in response.
Representations made under oath to the front desk out there would be, that would force people to be very honest in the representations they made.
Right, and that's one of the big objections we heard is how complex it is. And I'm not picturing zoning board objecting, really. Go ahead.
Thank you. I realize it's out of the ordinary. I just wanted to address that. So the special exception process goes through the Board of Appeals. If you all wish for me to take that away, that SE would become permitted, and then it would not be a conversation. There is no other process where any staff allow a use through a subjective list of criteria, and I am terribly against that idea. It's either permitted, a special exception, or it has conditions that are very stringent. So I just want to put that out there. I was hoping that this conversation would get us to a point. If you all have some things that you would like for me to address or provide options on the April 1st meeting, that is completely acceptable to staff.
That's great. That's exactly what I would think too, that we'd all participate in that and try to be ready for that.
At this juncture, any change would come by way of amendment, and that could get cumbersome.
So I would just, for me personally, whether you guys like it or not, I would like to understand the conditions component, like if we were to, in the R districts, do something that allows it with conditions that maybe do something differently. I don't know if that's what you were talking about. Like, is there something there that could be explored? And you don't have to answer me now. It's just more, that's my concern, is figuring out, do we really need to go to this through the special exception process for the R district, or can we just do something like with more conditions in the residential district? You don't have to answer now, but we can talk later.
I mean, I would be fine dropping the ZBA if someone says, I have a signed thing from my neighbor saying they're fine with it. That, I mean, to me, the only reason I want to go for the ZBA is because that's what we require everyone else to do. So now we're creating something that's not the same for everyone. And really, for me, the only thing is, this is about, protecting the integrity of your neighbors, and your neighbors are going to change too. And the person who's running that Airbnb is going to change too. They might sell it to someone else who wants to run an Airbnb. That might be one option, get all your neighbors to sign off on it. But I mean, there's a point to that.
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, another issue is that, now what if you don't get along with your neighbor? And then they say, I'll fix him, and I'll shut him down. And I don't think that should be a lot of neighbors feud.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't get along with their neighbors. Now that just opens it up for the neighbors to say, oh, he can't do that no, I don't want that. I mean, I don't know, it's the road you're going down.
I don't know how many calls the police will get if you're running an Airbnb and your neighbors don't like you. Probably, I think you'll get more calls to the police if you're running an Airbnb and your neighbors don't like you. That'll be more burdensome on the police, I think.
I feel like we might be ready.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, so, all those in favor of moving forward to public hearing? That's unanimous. Oh, wait, there's more. The next thing is order number 26-026, first reading and schedule a public hearing on the proposed amendment to chapter 601, the Town of Scarborough Traffic Ordinance. And Angela Blanchette, our town engineer, is presenting this one.
Thanks, Autumn.
Yeah. This one. Easy. Yeah, it's not good.
Okay. Try to re-gear. I thought Autumn was going to keep talking. Angela Blanchette, town engineer. I'm here tonight with Chief Holmquist, and I'm going to go through the chapter 601, which is the traffic ordinance, and some changes that we are proposing tonight. But I should say we were in front of the ordinance committee on March 5th. And went through these. And so I'm just going to go point by point and can answer any questions. It's a little bit of a jumble mix of things with this type of ordinance that deals with a lot of things, all traffic related. Once we open it up and saying, oh, well, we've been meaning to change this, or we've heard from residents about that. And so we kind of try to combine them all together into one proposal. So the first one is the limitation of size of vehicles that may park on a public street in a residential zone. This came up quite a few times in the Pine Point area when we've been going through public process with the East Grand Ave Complete Streets project and that design work. There's a lot of concerns about parking right up to driveways and not being able to see, and so those sight lines came into play. So I know Chief Holmquist looked at some other neighboring towns and looked at some of the language, which there are many examples surrounding us. And so that's one of them that you see in there. Next is having no parking on Bridges Drive. Aroma Joe's went in on Bridges Drive. The DOT issued a traffic movement permit for that site, and in that review, they require that there is no parking around that, just with the traffic that generates. Next was something that came from staff. Through the winter, we had some hiccups, I think, around public works operations with on-street parking, which also kind of led to, okay, let's look at the Downs area, which has obviously intentional on-street parking. As you can see in this picture, this is Front Runner. However, the ordinance speaks to the entire town as no parking from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. So I think at this point, we were looking for guidance from council to say, is that intended that way to be enforced? This is obviously a planned development that has intentional on-street parking. So I just wanted to have that conversation clarity for Public Works and PD as far as that enforcement. The next edit is similar to what I was in front of council previously, pulling out a list of every street in town in their speed limits. This is similar to that. We have a very long list of every stop sign, every yield sign, some of the other traffic controls. We are required by the state to keep a list of where those are in town. We are the only municipality that actually has them in the ordinance. What they have is, what you see in there is language from South Portland's, where they keep that as a separate document, which we have a shared file through Public Works, PD, all the departments can actually see. So that was like pulling that out as a traffic schedule. It helps us with eliminating some errors and kind of omissions. And actually, my intent was to take that exact list and move it into the traffic schedule as part of this and have no changes. However, when you open it, there are some glaring errors. And so we did a review. We did get comments from the public too on some signs that were identified that are out in the field that probably have been there for decades and decades. So we did do a review since the ordinance committee. So that list of the traffic schedule has been updated based on the most accurate information in the field. And I wanted to point out that what we did change for the traffic schedule, though, is looking at road postings or the no through trucks. And on Sawyer Street. That came up during our Sawyer Street conversations about coordinating with Cape Elizabeth and posting that road as no through trucks. And so that is right now on the list in the traffic schedule under no through trucks that has been added. That is the one road that was added. And then I did add, since the ordinance committee, I did want to just clarify that we did not have any edits or weren't proposing any edits for Higgins Beach or Prouts Neck. Again, when we heard from some residents, there was some really some language was adding just to add clarity. It does not, the changes that are proposed that you're seeing in front of you do not change any of the intent on where parking is. It just says no parking rather than just being blank. So it was trying to add some clarity around that. And we did hear some additional comments that on the first look at it, that I think we need more time as staff. So I have in here too that additional changes can be made in the future. So the town staff is prepared to continue to look at this and come at it in pieces. I think this ordinance is one that had not been touched really substantially for decades. And so I think it's going to take some time to do little piecemeal, trying to establish what needs to change in there. And so we are continuously adding to our list of, as we see things that come up, and we meet with Public Works, police, fire, and engineering and keep that tally going. So I'm sure I'll be back in front of you with maybe more edits next year. Oops. And That's all I have, so I can answer any questions you have.
Any questions?
Or
Okay. Is there any public comment on this? Okay, great. Motion,
So moved.
Second.
any discussion?
Yes. Thank you, Angela and Chief Holmquist, for working on this. So I did bring in some opposition during the ordinance committee meeting, which I will do again. And I think procedurally, one of my questions, are we voting on this as a package? Which is unfortunate, because I do kind of object to one of the things that was being proposed today, and that is to allow overnight parking in the Downs. So, I mean, the Downs is a very thoughtfully planned development that went through years of planning and development, and they are very well aware that there was no on-street parking. And so I will say I sat on the planning board for a year and I watched the tug of the back and forth between, let's preserve some space and, have some green space and not have parking. And I'll say, like, specifically with 3I, I mean, we were banking on their staff parking on the street and things like that, but the parking on the street was not for the residents. So it's very clear, like, I just want to make clear, like, this, we're not taking away parking from residents. My concern is just opening that Pandora's box of we're now allowing on-street parking in Scarborough somewhere. And then my concern is then, you have people on East Grand going, well, I want to park overnight too. I think the Downs was a very thoughtfully planned development, and I think they've pushed the limits with the parking, and I don't think that we should change our ordinances to accommodate, I think, some of those limits that were pushed. I also brought up the point that, if you allow overnight parking, I think that's maybe one way we're able to regulate short-term rentals or the occupancy down in the beach community, is because you can't park on the street overnight. But if you can suddenly park on the street in the Downs overnight, maybe that rental that you have suddenly now has 5 people there when it's really just a 2-car property. I guess I'm just, this is coming from staff. I understand procedurally or whatever to operate and make their job more efficient. But to me, in my mind, I was like, we went through this whole process. It's a very thoughtful planned development, and I just don't agree with now opening up to allowing overnight parking.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, on that issue, it looks like to me that they added parking spaces wider than what the road is. And it obviously was it was on purpose for the development. And where you have the houses so tightly congested, where are you gonna have parking? So, I know a lot of people say, oh, the Downs get special privileges. Well, they got special privileges being able to build these houses right on top of one another. So we allowed it. And, and you gotta live with it now. And they've had them there from the beginning. And again, there's a few driveways in town where people have like a turnaround. You usually have a turnaround driveway. They put their turnaround right at the street. And now you're gonna say they can't park a car there? So I think if you have you can't park your car near the street. If you're in your driveway, but it's too close to the street, you can't be there now. It's basically blocking the whole idea of the parking ordinance, I think, is to have two-way traffic. And if you have two-way traffic and people pulled off the pavement, even anybody in town, if they have company or have a party, get everybody off, all the tires off the pavement, I think they'll be okay. I think it would be fine. So I think that's what the Downs thing is, in fairness, but thank you.
Anybody else? Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Can we ask our town engineer where the Scarborough Downs provision came from? Who came up with that?
The edits, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, did the Downs push that on us?
No, it came, as I mentioned, there were a few instances where there were parking bans or parking issues around plowing, and I think it came up as staff as we weren't necessarily maybe enforcing the no parking on street because it was designated spaces, and that became a gray area of, okay, do we enforce or not enforce in those kind of designated areas? So I'm just looking for clarity because right now, as the ordinance stands, it says that there is no parking from 2 to 6. However, the intention, I think, and I'm sorry, Autumn left, that I think the intention was that those spaces maybe were to be used, not necessarily in their traffic count, because when we went through planning board, I think there was definitely those were extra, like for guest spaces and things like that. So I don't know, as it ever came up in the planning board review process that you should or should not be able to park there overnight. So I'm just saying that it's something that just needs clarity.
And it's an independent judgment by our staff, not any initiative of Scarborough Downs.
It did not come from Scarborough Downs, no.
No, in fact, I would say it's really a convenience for the residents. At this point, the Downs has demonstrated they've met the requirements separate and apart from this. My observation is many of the folks that live along Scarborough Downs Road will often pop into that front space because the door is right there. They have their own space behind and will probably interchange. So I think it's a convenience for our residents at this point.
Okay. Done. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I drove through there this weekend just to kind of look at it and see, and there were a lot of people parked on those on-street parking spaces that, again, there's nothing really there for you to visit except to just visit friends or like be there and there. So I felt like it's different to me than just typical on-street parking, because to the point that was made about two-way traffic going, like they've specially designed to have these parking spaces so that you can still have that two-way movement, so it's not blocking or stopping anything. And my understanding is that if we have a parking ban, that those cars are gonna have to move because we need to be able to plow. The other piece that I just feel like is a good reason to do this is like when we think of police and needing to enforce this, like I'd rather them not have to worry about going and ticketing all of these cars parked there if it's an issue and if that happens a lot, because I know they do ticket. I've gotten ticketed by the police for parking on my street. Not, this was before I was elected, but yeah, so I have a criminal record. I think I paid the fee, I hope.
That makes it.
Actually, no, it was my parents. It was my parents were visiting, and so they parked the car out on the road because we were playing basketball and we forgot to move it before the end of the night. Yeah, and so we got.
You don't have to justify.
Yeah, it was my parent. But it does happen, and so that's where I'm like, I just don't want, you know, like in that area in particular, I don't see a need to ticket anybody, especially if they live there and they're just trying to like be in that space close to their property. So common sense for me says this is fine.
Okay.
Go ahead, Scott.
One more point to that is plowing. And they wouldn't have to move those cars if there was you know, because we have for snow plowing, you can't park cars, even if it's a parking. You can park on the street during the day, but in these spots, what you're saying is they will be able to be there.
No, no, a snow emergency, a parking ban would include these spaces. They
It
would
would
have to move
include
them.
them, yeah.
It would.
I was almost saying it shouldn't even then. Basically, all they have to be aware of is it's best for them to move it, because otherwise the plow is gonna have to plow them in. And, you know, it'd probably be smart of them to have a parking ban, but, yeah.
Moving on.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion? That's 5 and opposed, 1. Thanks, Karen. Okay. Good news for order number 26027, and act on the request of the Chief of Police to accept the donation in the amount of $1,000 from the Bank of America Charitable Gift Fund on behalf of Robert and Joan Tricoti of Scarborough. Chief Holmquist.
Good evening. I have the easy lifting tonight, so I'll be quick. This is the 4th straight year that the Tricolis have made a generous donation to our police department, and with your approval, I'd love to accept that on behalf of our department. Thank you.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Any discussion? Scott?
Yeah, just one thing. I don't know who does the agenda, but we made the chief wait all through all this before this come out. Maybe the next time we ought to put him first on the agenda so he doesn't have to sit here all night.
He likes it.
Thank you.
Yeah, he said he wanted to learn more about short-term rentals, so.
That's right, that's right. I'm well versed now, so yeah, that's
I
right.
had the same thought that
Oh, yeah.
we should amend because we can do it right at the outset and seeing this item, save him a couple of hours.
Well, when you said you didn't have the heavy lifting, I thought you actually did because you had to listen to 3 hours chatter.
I just feel better when he's here, so that's why I like him just being here.
I know, right?
Any other discussion?
Well, I just want to thank the Tripolis because again, they continue to do this. So it's really great that we have residents that are so invested in our public safety. So thank you guys for the donation.
Okay. For a vote, all those in favor? That's 5 unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, chief. Okay. Oh, and 1 absent. Thanks, Scott. Order 26028 and act on the request to determine the course of action related to Scotta Hill Road culvert issue and direct the town manager to preserve all options, specifically the pursuit of a main infrastructure adaptation fund grant for a resilient culvert replacement and to propose financial resources in the fiscal year 27 budget to provide appropriation authority sufficient to fund any of the options.
Yes, you may recall this council had a workshop back on February 4th. At that time, staff reviewed kind of 2 different paths, and under each of those paths, there were kind of 2 options. We have secured funding for one of those options. There's a grant that we've confirmed that we can kind of hold on to as we move through and understand other options. The other one is involving a DOT grant that doesn't open until May. So we're right now preparing for that and intend to apply for it. That's part of this direction. You may recall, we won't know about that grant until August. And then if we're successful, we won't be able to spend it until 27. So that's a downside. It's a big grant. It accomplishes, I think, the desired fix from the consensus of council, but it's delayed. So at any rate, as I mentioned at the outset of the meeting, really to make sure the public is aware of what we're doing in the kind of the interim. We thought it was important to bring an action item forward that kind of laid that out. There obviously contemplates a future final decision when we know more about the different options. So
And Tom, if we
Yes.
don't get the second grant, we don't lose the first grant. Is that correct?
correct, we've confirmed that they will
Right.
hold that award.
Yeah.
And they know that we're applying for this specifically and know the timeline. So yes.
Is there a motion to move this forward?
Want to go to the public?
Oh, any public comment on this? Good point. Seeing none. A motion to move.
So moved.
Second.
And council discussion?
Yeah, the first option that's available, when can that be done?
Well, the option we have in hand now, which is a grant to remove the culverts, close the road and restore the brook, we could do today.
Oh, it's restore the brook. Oh, okay, I didn't know
Right.
that. I don't want.
This allows us to pursue the other one, which is a resilient culvert. And then
Yeah.
we'll make sure that we have sufficient resources or authorization from you through the budget process to move forward on any of the 4 options if you choose to.
And
do that.
the second one says it can't be done until 27. Does that mean January 1st?
I can't answer that.
Cause I know we have to do it in the winter.
Yeah.
Right.
So it may work out good.
Presumably we can do it in spring of 27. Yes,
Yeah.
I'll confirm that, but I would hope.
And is DOT gonna hire, who does it or are we?
I believe we would,
Bid it out.
we're gonna design the project. I believe we bid it out and administer it.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
John?
The only comment I have, and I don't know if we need to amend this or just discuss it or it's part of the budget, is I like the idea of going in the budget with the 1.2 million. because that's like the highest cost I think it could be, right, for one of the options. I just want to make sure we're reserving the right that whatever we do, we also are setting aside money for traffic improvements.
Mhm.
Not just the design and the culvert option. So I just want to give us that flexibility. So that a lot of the residents we heard have said, well, if we're gonna do,
Make it safer.
yeah, we should make it safer as well in the area. So I just don't want to lose that
Mhm.
option. Cause I don't think it's gonna be 1.2, because 1.2 million was really,
That's the minimal culvert replacement.
yeah,
Right.
which is the highest. And so if we got if we only had to do 900,000, maybe we do 100,000 in traffic improvements. So this kind of keeps us covered.
The worst case scenario from a local funding point of view would be we choose to do the resilient culvert, we don't get the grant, that's 3.9.
Yeah.
Right.
And that we wouldn't be funded.
But
for it.
I thank you for the input. I'm just finalizing the narratives that go with the CIP for the budget. I will make sure that it's expansive enough to include, one, budget enough to include traffic mitigation and also verbiage to make sure that it extends to that as well.
Good.
And I just wanted to be clear that there was some talk about doing the design work ahead of time on our dime.
Mhm.
And I just want to be clear that we would not start that until we knew the outcome of all these other issues, because that would only necessarily be for the resilient culvert, right?
Our thought was to start it right away, really to be in a position with award to be able to move as quickly as possible. And the rationale for that is, one, the timing, but two, we know we're gonna have a failure at Payne Road at some point. We can do all the survey, it's so close. For all I know, the design for Scotto Hill would be almost a mirror. I mean, it's 200 feet up the line. So I think it's wise to spend that money so we have the design in hand. Starting as soon as the authorization applies in July.
But is it possible that we would still close the road and not need that design work?
I suppose that's possible, but there again, I think you'd still see value in that for the Payne
Payne.
Road that ultimately.
So the
would have-
scope is bigger. The scope is.
We would, right, the
Yeah.
budget contemplates really designing for Scotto, but Angela's quite certain that that design is very likely to be able to be replicated for Payne Road. And certainly the survey will be captured at the same time. So I think that's,
If we waited and found out if we got the grant would also cover that design work though, right?
it would,
So. But we would maybe miss then the opportunity for spring 27 work.
Well, my understanding is, again, if we wanted to be able to hit the ground running, because the funds aren't released to us much later than when we get the award for the grant, this is why we would want to do the design work as early as we can. So that way, when the money is actually released to us, we can start making the improvements. So we wouldn't have the money when we know we get the award. It's not the same as when we get the dollars. And so any delay we wait would potentially push out any improvement for the project. So I'm an advocate for saying, let's do it. Let's authorize to have the money to do it. Start doing it as soon as we can so that we can make improvements to this project as soon as we can. But otherwise, we run the risk of being another year out. And so just trying to avoid that risk, I think.
But if we spend that money, we can't be
We can't get
paid
it by
back by
grant.
the grant.
Yeah,
Right.
correct.
Payne Road is not eligible for a grant, we know that.
Right.
So again, it's a bit of a risk, it's a little out of normal order. Typically, we'd wait for an award before we do design. I think given the interest in the matter and the time delays and the other complicating factors, an exception here, I think makes sense. I will propose in the budget, two separate pieces. One is design money and one is construction money. So you'll
Okay.
be able to see that.
That's good. Okay.
One more thing. On the Payne Road culvert, I think we should act immediately. We've got to get on top of this. This is kind of ridiculous having this long. We got to get on top of this infrastructure and have it dealt with a little bit quicker. And Payne Road is a very important one to do that with. And when we put this new culvert in, you don't know what the ramifications of that will be. You're gonna have more flow that's gonna be coming at this aged culvert that's on Payne Road. and we may have a failure. And I think we should deal with it before we have a failure. I don't think we should wait for a failure, because now you're talking closing Payne Road. So if there is no grants available, or there isn't, then we've got to get in the budget to do the culvert in Payne Road too. Immediately afterwards, because obviously you have to have the Scotto Hill to relieve traffic while you shut down. Are you kidding me? Payne Road.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to have all the traffic going up Scotto Hill. That's the importance of not turning this back to a river. Because if we didn't have that road to do Payne Road, you'd have to go, traffic would have to go to Dunstan. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my understanding is we can't dictate when that happens because it is a DOT road. And so we don't control the timing of that. But by having hopefully the design in hand and the changes, maybe entices DOT to prioritize it. So I think that's where it's important that we.
So Scotto Hill, we're responsible for?
Yeah.
Oh, but Payne Road, the state, so we don't have to get a grant because the state is gonna pay for that to be done? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if the state would pay for all of the work to be done for Payne Road.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like with our traffic improvement, our traffic impact fees. Right now, we're collecting fees to try and get some money.
Right.
So that we can entice the state to bring their money to fix the road. And so it's a little bit like that, I think, where we can't do anything without their cooperation. So whatever we can do to like show them we're serious, we're ready, I think will
Well, I
hopefully.
think we should call them and let them know this is an issue that could be catastrophic, and I'd be adamant about that.
The good news is they're gonna be here on April 22nd.
Right.
It sounds like
Yeah.
talking about, because all of these issues are connected, right? What's happening on Route 1.
Yep.
In that project.
March 24th?
Yes, well, that's transportation.
Transportation tomorrow, if you want to come tomorrow,
Right.
or next week, sorry.
Yeah.
If you want to come next week.
And then
Another one.
April 15th. in
Oh,
front of this
15th,
council.
right.
I thought you said 22nd.
22nd. You changed it.
Changed it.
22nd, I beg your pardon.
Oh, right, that's, the other one you changed.
I will send around those dates tomorrow.
Reminder.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous.
Thank you.
With one absent, two absent. Okay, there's no non-action items at this time. Council member comments. John?
Great job tonight, Larry. You did awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other than the 3-hour time frame.
I was gonna say that too. I thought you did a fantastic job and everything ran smoothly and it was a good meeting. I did tell my husband I'd be home early tonight because it was gonna be a quicker agenda and he laughed. So now I know why he laughed.
Yes.
Any other council comments? I'll just go, thank you for that. And I will tell you, my wife and I have a bet every meeting on the over under. I give her a time I'm gonna be home and she takes either the over or the under, and she always takes the over and wins.
Larry, my favorite comment was we were doing like number 7 of conversation with counselors. And you said, oh, my wife's gonna come to the next one so she can actually talk to me or see me.
Well, I
But
mean,
you
I think.
did win tonight though, because it's before 9, wasn't it 9?
Well, wait, I can keep going. Yeah, well, I would say it's great when we have a lot of residents here, like,
Yeah.
even though, like, yeah, we look at the agenda and we think, oh, this will be a quick one. It's always totally worth it when we have people show up and speak. And I'm just very
Right.
appreciative of everybody that came tonight.
Absolutely.
Well said. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you so much.